Hello and welcome. It is May 27th, Thursday. It is TheoryCraft episode 17. At the end of the month, I do interviews with people, and today I am joined by Oscar Starshaped Svedberg. I hope I got that right. He is a player, streamer, YouTuber, huntress god, and now a fan favorite orc player, of course. Starshaped, how you doing, and how did I do with your last name pronunciation?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me. The pronunciation was good. I guess both of those names kind of have an English pronunciation and a Swedish pronunciation. So, like, I don't. My name isn't Oscar. That's what you'd say in English.
Okay.
It's Oscar.
Oscar. Okay. Yeah.
Oscar.
When I interviewed Thorzane last month, and I had a lot of issues with his last name. It took me. I had to look up a YouTube video, and it took me about an hour of repeating it over and over again, and then I still screwed it up at the end of
the
doozy.
Yeah. Svedberg's a bit easier. Svedberg.
Oh, that's how it's actually. Okay, yeah. I don't know if I'd be able to do that, but at least I can sort of scuff it with my Canadian accent for sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you today is I guess I have a little bit of an anecdote to start. Is the couple of times I've had the privilege of speaking to some players. I've interviewed Todd and I've interviewed Thorzane. Now I interviewed Bidu, of course, at the start. But I always sort of ask questions to people. I remember when I went to Anaheim, I asked Thorzane a question at the end of one of his games against Moon, and I had this big story in my head about why he was doing a specific thing. He stole the priest away on Terranistan from Moon, and I was like, okay, he must be doing that because he's trying to convince Moon that he went for an Archmage first, so he's trying to deny the priest so he can't disenchant the water elementals, so then Moon doesn't go blink to defend against the Mountain King, and then he can get a free surround. And I say this to Thorzane, and I'm like, is that why? I had this whole contrived story in my head, and then he just goes, no, I just sort of did it because I had the opportunity. And there's another time when I was in Happy's chat a few years ago, and Happy used to do this thing against Orc where he'd go into 2 crypt ghouls at some point in the sort of mid to late game. He did this for about a year, I think. And
I remember that.
Yeah, and I asked him in his chat, and for some reason he actually answered my question, which I was very surprised by. He answered my question when I typed in his chat, and he said, no, it's sometimes it's just something that I do. I don't want to misquote him exactly, but that's pretty much the explanation he gave to me. And something I've always really admired about your streams and listening to you speak about the game and stuff is you have a tendency to actually not only explain things that you're doing well and your thought process, but you seem to have a reason behind things you're doing. Not saying that these other players don't, of course, have reasons behind the things they're doing, but they seem to be much more intuitive when they do them, whereas you have almost concrete evidence. Is that be a true statement for your sort of style of play? You're very much thinking about what your next move in the game is and you have a reason for it? Or would you say that's maybe inaccurate?
I think it's accurate to the point where, like, going into a game, as far as matchups, maps, strategies, like I try to think a lot about what might happen in a game and then have a plan for it. But like when you're in the game, especially if it's a high stakes game, like if it's a high level game, the clan war or some kind of cup or whatever qualifier, a lot of times it just goes blank, and then it's just you kind of just play without really thinking about it. So I think I can kind of see myself in Thorzane's answer there. It's like I just did something because I just did it, But I typically try to have some sense of what I'm doing and why. And if I'm doing something randomly or like something that I haven't done before, like if a situation occurs in the game, then I'll try to, if I'm watching the replay or thinking about the game, I'll try and think about like why did I do that and what could I have done instead and stuff like that.
Yeah, because there's sort of, this is almost maybe too binary, but I seem to have noticed there's very intuitive players. When I spoke to Todd, he seems like a very intuitive player. He's sort of doing things on the fly and getting into these late game situations that you can't always have A counters B, counters B, counters C sort of thing in these late game scenarios. But then I'll speak to somebody like Hitman, and he'll be like, yeah, if I get the Trapper to half health by the time he reaches this, he can't get the last hit, and then I'll be level 1.9, and I'll be able to steal this at the last second sort of thing. He has a very, flow chart sort of way. And I've been trying to figure out, like, because from someone like me who's a relatively low level player, but I do like to analyze games and have reasonings for things, there seems to be sort of these two ways of looking at the game, one being very intuitive and from like sort of almost a mental game standpoint. When you're competing offline, players like Todd and Thorzane at LANs all the time, maybe you have to be more thinking about the player you're up against and how am I going to go into the match feeling, am I going to be confident, sort of thing. There's this whole mental preparation side of things, but then there's also these players that, like Hitman is always my example for this, that has practiced a lot at home, sitting comfortably in their chair, and they have a very much headspace of what's exactly going to go on in the game as opposed to that. Do you think there's a advantage to one or the other, or do you think you sort of need, again, I say it's like a binary, but do you think there's a need for sort of both sides of that?
I mean, I probably need both, but your example of Hitman there, I think I can see that a lot in like Grubby as well. I think
yes,
Grubby is one of those players who kind of does both, where when he first started streaming, I was really happy because I never saw him stream before, and it was really cool. And it struck me very quickly how not only he knows so much, and he can convey that during the game. Like, okay, if I hit this twice more, and this happens, and I can do this, and like he can just rattle off about these details that I never thought about.
Right.
But then he can also just do things in the heat of the moment that I have no idea why he's doing, and then like half a second later, I'll realize, oh, that's why he did that. It's like he's very, very quick. And he's one of the greats. So I guess you probably need both if you want to be one of the very best. But the flowchart style, like you're mentioning, is something you can practice. Whereas the other aspect, I'm not so sure. If it feels like a lot of it has to do just with like intuition, or like it's something. It's a lot hard to put your finger on it to kind of like, how do you practice that? Whereas the flowchart thing, you can practice. You can just hammer out the details. You can learn a bunch of things and know how things work.
Yes.
And then repeat it every single time, especially like creep patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah, sort of like the grind mentality as opposed to maybe what people would consider the talent side of things. And I think Grubby, in a way, for his stream, is almost sort of reverse engineering his intuition at times on his stream. When he does something, he'll look at it afterwards and someone will ask, and I get this sometimes too when I'm like analyzing replays and I'm just giving almost my opinion on it, and then people are like, why did he do that? And I'm like, I don't actually know, but let me try to like reverse engineer what I think he was doing. But yeah, there must be some stuff that at the end of a game, players like Grubby are like, I don't actually know why I did that, but it worked out, so here's why I think it worked out. But there's so many situations when Grubby, I think especially, and maybe you've had experience with this recently with these sort of orc games you've been playing, which I definitely want to talk about today, but Grubby's very much, he used to play a hit and run style a lot of the time. He used to get in these wacky situations, make his opponent uncomfortable. And when you get in those situations, I think you're much less likely to have these flow charts. So you're both forced into a situation where you have to play on intuition. And I think that's definitely where Grubby sort of thrives in games, and that's how he's able to maybe upset players that he would be the underdog nowadays against. Would you agree with that, or?
Absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned Grubby, because I think if we're going to talk about orc later, then I mean Grubby and I think Lynn as well are two examples of orcs who don't intentionally lane like hit and run, but they will reactively do it, which is the best way to do it. Like I do it because I really like it. I think it's fun.
Right.
But the best way to do it is find yourself in a situation where you're maybe slightly behind, maybe you're a lot behind, and realize that, okay, my next step if I want to win this game is to start laming. So yeah, that's also, a lot of that's intuition. It's kind of feeling when you can and should do that. I think Grubby is one of the best examples of that. I think Lynn as well.
Yeah, and I think the sort of searching for almost a win condition, I think Orc is almost unique in that, and if you have this sort of fighting spirit as an Orc player, you can really find your way back because you always have this option of going for the hit and run sort of style. You always have this option of doing, 4 fortified towers at your expansion. And, we've even seen like Liquid Fire Bat Riders from you. Hitman does it sometimes against DH first. But you have this, I'm not sure, maybe you have playing Human and Night Elf. Is there other sort of late game comeback options for these other races, or is it really only Orc that's unique in that, do you think?
I think it depends a lot on the matchup and the map and
Hmm.
stuff. Like every
Yep.
race has that to some extent. And we've seen like how many games haven't we seen of Moon, for example, coming back, very slowly,
Hmm.
blink fan and knives, building expansions everywhere. Foggy does that as well.
Hmm.
And it kind of you can look at that and say like, oh, well, it looks kind of hopeless for his opponent. Like it almost seems unfair.
Right.
So I don't think Orc is the only one. I think Human can do that as well. We've seen like tanks and towers expansions. Like it's I guess that's hard to do reactively.
Mm.
Whereas I think both Night Elf and Orc have more like quick reactive laming tools, but Orc by far the most, of course. And that was always my biggest frustration if I'm playing Night Elf against Orc
Hmm.
and I'm playing like straight up like Dryads or whatever. I know in the back of my head that at any point in the game, if my opponent wants to, he can drag this out to like a 50-minute game if he really wants to. Uh, and that always bothered me playing against Orc, especially as Night Elf. I feel like Night Elf has the worst response to it as well because Night Elf towers are garbage.
Right.
I guess we can talk more about that later, but yeah. But every race has different ways to do it. But Orc, I mean, if you just look on paper, like the way the game was designed, Orc is supposed to be the kind of. I mean, they have the unit
Yes.
called the Raider, and it has siege damage. They have pillage as enough. Like somebody at some point when they were making Warcraft said, okay, Orc, this is how they're supposed to play. And it didn't really turn out that way. That's not really how Orc is played, but they still have those tools. And if you want to, you can play that way. I mean, Orc just has by far, speed scroll, raiders, pillage, ensnare, liquid fire bats, fortified burrows and
Yes.
towers. So you just have all of these things. So they're like the best lamers, and they have the best anti-lame as well.
Yeah, they have even like spiked barricades you could think of as like
Yeah,
anti-lame stuff like that, and very good scouting with witch doctors and windwalk and wolves, and lots of good tools for that too. Would you find you mentioned that it a little bit difficult to deal with for Night Elf is the Orc lame? Would you say that a lot of the time, because I've told this story before, but I hope I'm remembering this now that I have you in front of me, but I learned how to play rifle caster from your WCR rifle caster guide. Am I remembering that it was all text and it had pictures, and you had a picture of Turtle Rock where you showed how to put your blacksmith in the back at the top right position? Do you
oh my
remember
god.
doing that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
I
that's
I I hadn't remember that until you just wow. How long ago was that? Jesus.
because I saw it in probably because I'm a relatively newer player. I think I saw it in
Yeah.
2011, 2012, but I'm not sure how old it was. But yeah, that's actually how I learned how to play rifle caster. But the reason I bring that up is now you switched from human to night elf and maybe somewhat to orc. I'm not sure if you're fully committed on the orc train yet, but would you say you switch between races because of frustrations you have in certain matchups, or for actual, strategical, like, I think this is the best race to currently play,
Hmm.
or just
Good
for
question,
fun
man.
maybe too?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's hard to answer that question because I'm not really sure myself. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's like different parts to it that all go together.
Mm-hmm.
One aspect I think is, at least in the past, was frustration because I remember playing human, and I remember thinking that Night Elf was completely busted. And I remember thinking that human against Night Elf specifically was impossible. It just could not win that matchup. And at that time, War Chief Rich was on my team,
Mm-hmm.
and I was friends with him. So, and I could never beat him. And obviously, like he was much better than I was, and he turned out to become, one of the best in Europe. But I remember that specifically was like a frustration for me. Like I just can't beat this guy, and it looks so easy when he does it. Like he's just making those bears and triads, and you know. So at first, I didn't switch to Night Elf. I just learned Night Elf Mirror
Mm-hmm.
because I thought that was like the ultimate fu to
Right.
Night Elf players. It's like I'll beat you in Night Elf Mirror because
Yeah.
I don't want to play human, and I want to beat you on even grounds. Because I honestly probably thought. I mean, I was younger back then too, but I probably honestly thought that Night Elf players were just bad, and they were just using their race as a crutch. So I'm like, if I just learned the mirror matchup, I can beat them easily. And I forget who recommended it to me, but some Night Elf player recommended to learn Potom Hunts, uh, just for the mirror matchup, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all I learned first. And I did play Night Elf mirror in Clan Wars against Night Elves and stuff. But then eventually I switched because I remember I got like a replay pack from War Chief Rich, and like 100 replays. He was playing a lot of ladder, and
Mm-hmm.
it looked a lot of fun. Like the matchup looked a lot of fun, and I was kind of tired with the human, and we're talking about reasons for switching. One of the reasons I think I did switch was just to keep the game fresh and alive. And
Yep.
I think this was just around the time W3 Arena was out. Like I was kind of privy to the alpha stage. Like I knew it was coming, and I had contact with the guys making it.
Right.
If you know what W3 Arena is, right? How old is that?
Yeah, I think it started in 2014, if I remember.
Yeah, you were around. You were around.
Yeah,
right?
I was around. Yeah.
Yeah. So they released that, and I remember I played one game as human, and I was just like not feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing like Dota at the time, Dota 2. So I was just like, okay, well, I'm not feeling it. This isn't fun. I'll just uninstall Warcraft, whatever. But then my next thought was because like I think a lot of it is I'm drawn to the community. I really like the scene.
Yes.
I like watching streams and replays and being a part of the community. So even if I'm not enjoying the game, I still want to because it's like it's worth it if I can find some way to enjoy it. So that's
Right.
when I'm like, okay, I'll try Night for real. I won't just play the Night Mirror. I'll actually learn the race. I'll get this replay pack from Rich. And I copied him entirely, and I got wrecked so hard. And that was one of those eureka moments where it's like, okay, Night Elf isn't that busted. Or if it was, then I certainly hadn't discovered how yet.
Right. Yeah.
And it's one of those perspective changes that really helps you as a player. It's like if you've only played one side of the matchup, the details of your opponent is very fuzzy. You just kind of experience what they're doing, and it can feel really busted, but you don't know the specifics and what their struggles are. So when I switched to Night Elf, this was before all these patches, when everyone was playing Demon Hunter. And you had these very specific like mass talents against Orc and a lot of like just one archer techs and stuff.
Yeah.
And on the ladder, like on the pro scene, it looked really easy because everyone was playing standard. But on the ladder, I lost so many games like tower rushes, mass raiders, bats, mass hunts. All these things that as a human player I never really thought about Night Elf players having to experience. And just watching pro replays never even saw. Mm-hmm. So if you're gonna switch race, you have to be prepared for that. Probably more so with Night Elf because they have like the weakest base defense. But no matter what race you switch to, you're gonna lose a ton of games to things that you just haven't seen.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to be standard things. They're just going to be like cheesy things, and you just have to accept those losses. And so that was kind of my first experience of actually switching and realizing like, okay, it's not that easy. There's a lot of annoying stuff I have to deal with as Night Elf, which eventually led to me just massing hunts every game.
Right. Well, there's a couple really interesting points you made there. Well, the first, of course, is I think that's a really common thing for people to switch races when they're maybe a little bit bored with the game, but also when they think that another race might be busted, and then they start playing the race, and then they find out. I remember I switched to Undead for like a year or something, or 6 months, and I ended up getting tanked every game. This is back maybe 2015 when people were still tanking. I would get tanked, I'd get Zeppelin Raider dropped in my base, and I would just lose all my fiends. I'm like, wait, I thought I could just build fiends and out micro every opponent sort of thing. And then you really realize, I think this is common for players of all skill levels. They switch races thinking one is busted, and then they really learn the hard way that there's so many things they didn't account for. They just think of the most standard build order. You just think, okay, I'll just go Talons against Orc, and then you get Raider lamed, and you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do? And then you get, Blade Naga Tower rushed at tier 2, and you're like, I have one Archer, what am I supposed to do? I think that's a really common thing. And would you find, is that sort of why you stuck to the Mass Hunter style? You, of course, didn't stick to it forever. You of course, been playing much more standard recently, but do you think that's why you stuck with that for a while, to sort of think, okay, I'll learn it. I'll learn it from this one. We're talking about flowcharts, this one sort of stem of the flowchart in a way?
In a way, like I think I talked about this a long time ago in another interview. I'm just trying to remember. Because, I remember the reason I started massing hunts was just purely by accident. Because like I had a ladder game. I was still playing standard Rich style, just trying to copy him, trying to get better. And I was playing against an undead player. I want to say it was a Morphlink, which you might not know, but a German undead player.
Okay.
Who always played like Gargs and was really annoying. And he sent like a quick ghoul to my base.
Yeah, I call it the Jewel Ghoul is what I call it myself.
The Jewel Ghoul.
Yeah.
All right. How so?
There's a player name, he's I think an American player, JO_OL, and he used to do it every single game and flame his opponent. So I call it the Jewel Ghoul myself.
All right, so he did a Jewel Ghoul on me.
Thank you.
And I forget the map. Actually, I remember the map. I forget what it's called. It was one of those old W3 Arena maps. It had a mercenary camp. So I was like, I'm going to creep the mercenary camp, get my demon hunter, going to play standard. And I had never experienced that before. Just a quick ghoul, pulled the creeps. I'm like, I was so upset because it was just, it was just one more thing where I'm like, oh, another one of those cheesy, annoying situations where I'm
Right.
just going to lose because I didn't know what to do. But in my rage, my demon hunter was like half done. I just canceled the demon hunter and I started to Keeper of the Grove. And then I thought, like, I'm so far behind now. What's the one way I can get back into the game?
Mm-hmm.
And my thought was, I'll just build a Tree of Life somewhere on the map. Because this guy just did something really cheesy, so I'll cheese him back.
Mm-hmm.
I built my Keeper of the Grove. I built a Tree of Life, and that was the first game where I ever did something like a Tree of Life into like mass art. He was playing ghouls, like I said,
Right.
gargoyles. So I just went like mass archers and stuff, and I actually won the game like very convincingly. And I don't think I ever beat him before that with my standard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the start, because then I asked myself the question after that game, like, could I do this in every matchup? And that's another thing, which, if we're going to talk about races and strategies and stuff and switching races, I have this very peculiar habit of trying to force one strategy to work in every matchup. I don't know why, but I like the idea of like getting this one thing to work. And if it doesn't work in every matchup, I'll abandon it. So it could be like Demon Hunter Lures.
Yes.
I want to make that work in every matchup. Keeper first, I want to make that work in every matchup. Potom first, I want to make that work in every,
Mm-hmm.
So I asked myself that question: can I make this type of strategy work in every matchup? And I just experimented from then on. And there's no player to watch. There were no replays to go off of, so it was an entirely different experience. From kind of copying one player and looking at a bunch of replays to just kind of freestyling it,
Right.
and slowly cobbling together my own strategies, my own timings, and see what works and what doesn't work. And that was a lot of fun. So I think that's why I started it, and I was very successful with it compared to what I had been trying to play the standard demon style.
Right. Yeah, I could definitely understand that idea of trying to figure out every detail to one specific thing. I'm very much in that headspace as well, as I want to be able to do one thing consistently, work out all the details, and really master this one thing. Like the Bruce Lee sentiment of, he who masters one kick does it 1,000 times, whatever, better than the person who does 1,000 kicks one time. I've always very much enjoyed that sentiment. Would you find sort of, you mentioned that ghoul and then getting your Ancient War canceled as well. And then there's sort of the idea of this where, okay, he sent that ghoul. He has this one option to send an early jewel ghoul to cancel my Ancient War. So now I got to build my Ancient War like 3 hexes back or something like that. Or I always have to have a wisp next to that Ancient War. Do you find yourself being like a sort of an analytical mind when you think about that stuff? Do you just say, okay, now I have to do this stuff 100% of my games, if you understand what I mean? Or are you sort of playing the player in that? Or are you always making these adjustments to be permanent? Because that's one thing I've thought a lot about. Like, okay, if one race has 10 options against me and I have to counter all 10 of those early game options, now all of a sudden my early game is much weaker unless I'm trying to blind counter 5 of those 10 options. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I understand exactly what you mean, and I think that's like a pitfall you can easily fall into, where you're like, I want to be super solid, super safe. I'm gonna make sure nothing is ever gonna get me.
Right.
But if you play with that mentality, well, I mean, I guess you should try and play as safe as possible if you're trying to learn something, trying to just grind ladder games and stuff. But I think a lot of people don't realize this, but there is a big difference between a ladder game and a tournament game. If you're playing against someone who you know and they know you, there's a lot of like meta going on there between the two players. And in general, I think I'm not that concerned about being super safe. Like, I think a classic example would be Night of Mirror. If you look at like a map like Amazonia, where you're going to Ancient War creep the lab, but you can either put the Ancient War like right next to the creeps and be as fast as possible, and if he sends a quick wisp, you just lose. Or you can put it, further back, and if he sends a quick wisp, then he just wasted a bunch of resources for nothing. And in that situation, I'll always put it right next to the creeps, because that's like, it's almost a gentleman's agreement. If you're 2 good Night Elf players playing, it's like, we're both going to be the most efficient we want to be. If I'm playing against, Moon or Lalite or anyone like really, really good, I
Yes.
just assume they're not going to do this, and I'm not going to do it to them. But some players, especially if you recognize the name, if you're familiar with them and you know that they have a habit to do that type of thing, which I was like when I was playing Mass Hunts, I always did that type of thing.
Right.
And against that type of player, you definitely want to kind of consider playing safer. And I know I have one concrete example, which is not Michael. I guess he goes by now.
Mm-hmm.
On Amazonia, Michael always sends a ghoul. I don't know why, but he always sends a quick ghoul.
Yeah, he's the only top player I think that does that I've seen really.
And it blows my mind because it's a cheese.
Yep.
And if you do a cheese consistently, it doesn't work.
Yes.
So whenever I play Michael on Amazonia, I just build my Ancient War in my base, and I'll see that ghoul, and he just lost the game.
Right.
Like, so in some situations you have to be stubborn and like, okay, this guy's gonna do it. I'm gonna be very safe.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the times you should probably take the risk, I think.
Do you think that's
just like an idle? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think that's a little bit because not that you're necessarily doing a cheese, of course, but you are doing an off-meta strategy. So by definition, or were back then, let's say, until keeper meta, of course. So by definition, off-meta would be not optimal, not the best strategy. So although he's doing a cheese and you're just doing something slightly off-meta, would you say that's almost an argument against this? I'm trying to fit this, square peg into a round hole of a strategy, because if I do this and people know it's coming and they find the perfect answer, if they play standard and play standard well, you're sort of always going to lose by definition, if you see what I mean. Or would you say that's sort of two different analogies?
Like my Mass Hunt style?
The Mass Hunt style, yeah, because the meta would be the meta because by definition it should be the best strategy, right? So if there is this sort of, if you always do a cheese or always do a off meta strategy, somebody's going to understand that and find the solution. And then if it's equally skilled, they should probably always win, I think, at least on paper, right?
I think you raised several points here. The first one would be, standard is standard for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I accept that. I accepted that back then as well. But there can be two advantages to playing non-standard. Well, there can be several advantages. I mean, first of all, it can be a lot of fun. Like,
yes,
we just,
for sure,
the fun argument. Like, I'm just having fun trying some new
First
stuff.
and foremost, absolutely, yeah.
First and foremost. But then there's also a surprising amount of players can only play standard. They can only play if you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And, I got a lot of flack back in the day. I was flamed so like nobody likes to lose against something that isn't standard because it feels kind of more humiliating, because it's like you shouldn't be doing this and it shouldn't be working. But a lot of players, they cannot adapt to something different, and they'll keep doing what they would have done against the standard.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just keep doing as if I'm playing like Demon Hunter Talons and I'm actually going Keeper Hunts, and they'll just keep doing the same thing, and I'll get so many free wins for that. But then, of course, there are players, top level players, who will adapt, who will play differently based on what you're actually doing, and not just robotically going through the motions.
Right.
Which it can be a point of frustration for sure, because what I often experienced was I would do something different, something new. I would work out some kind of strategy, some timing, some build order, and I would have huge success with it. It would work so well over and over. Until it didn't. Until someone hard countered it. They either figured something out or they knew something beforehand, and it's just I'm like, okay, this doesn't actually work. I thought this was an amazing strategy. I thought it worked all the time because it did work all the time, but then I ran into a brick wall. And motivationally speaking, it's like I almost want to just abandon it because I know in the back of my head that if more players pick up on how to play against this, it's just never going to work.
Yeah.
But the rational side of you also says that most people aren't going to pick up on this. Maybe a couple of players will know what to do, but most people won't. So it's still a valid strategy. But that was always something I struggled with back then when I was like trying new strategies, developing new timings. Was this kind of almost like a wave,
Right.
It was working really well, and then it just didn't work anymore, and I had to abandon it, or like I had to adapt it. Which is, if you compare it to playing standard, that's something you never run into, because you have a million replays to watch. Everyone, like, you know what you're supposed to do. Your opponent knows what you're supposed to do. It's like a dance almost. Like you're both doing what you're supposed to be doing, and
Beautiful.
there are
Yeah.
no surprises.
That's a great way to
But
put it. Yeah.
yeah, and so, but if you are doing something different, first of all, it's really hard to uh, it's hard to get a sense of how the game is going to go because every player will react differently
Mm-hmm.
to something that they don't know what, if I'm going keeper mass hunts against undead back in the day, there were like 100 reactions from different players.
Right.
So it's not like if I played Demon Hunter, Naga, or whatever, then I knew there was one reaction. There was one thing they were going to do because that's what you're supposed to do. So it kind of goes both ways where the opponent might struggle, but I also have to be kind of paranoid because I know about these 100 different things that they might do based on what I've played against.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well put. Yeah, the idea of a dance, I think I've never heard it put that way, but that's a great way to put it, and that's what it is when you're like a player of my skill level or anywhere below that. When you're just sort of, I'm an orc player. Well, I'm just gonna watch a Lin replay, and then I'm just gonna copy what he does, and I'm gonna do it every time. And then, oh my God, he misstepped one time. He went a little ahead of the beat, whatever. And now I have no idea what I'm doing. I think that's again a very, very common problem that lower level players will especially face. They're like, I don't know what to do. He built a Wind Rider and Orc Mirror. What am I supposed to do at this point?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a really great point for sure, and especially in today's meta too. There's way more. There's definitely way more variability in today's meta. We, of course, just in units alone. So maybe this is a problem. I'm not sure if at your skill level have you faced this problem more so, because certainly at the lower levels this is a big issue because there's just being an orc player you can play all 4 altar heroes now at the beginning, so there's a lot more to add to your flowchart. But is that something you've struggled with a little bit in this new meta with lots of new builds?
I'm not sure if I'd struggle with it. I think, compared to back in the day, Warcraft was such a solved game.
Yes.
Before all these patches, there was like one strategy for each matchup, and if you didn't do it, you were probably going to lose at the top level.
Right.
And it was very, very stale. So in that sense, it was more fun to do something different because it was so hard back then, and it was so unexpected, and it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like you said, now there's already, I guess on paper, the game is much healthier now than it has been in a long time. Because there are so many options for each race, for each matchup. There are different heroes, unit compositions. But I think it's not something that I struggle with. Like, I'm not sure how to put this. It's just like, because there's always a meta. There's always, like, even though it's a lot more shifting these days, and there are frequent balance updates that throw things around. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be some kind of standard, something that's, being played the most.
Yes.
Of course, there are some volatile. Like right now, Orc Mirror is one of those matchups that just seems to be all over the place.
It's crazy.
Like I've watched so many replays recently, and it's just every single one's different. There's different hero choices, different timings, different strategies. It's just, So in that environment, it's probably a lot harder to do something different because there's nothing really to base. Like, back in the day, if I was going to do something different, or if I wanted to try something, then I would always base it on whatever the meta was, because that's what you have to do.
Right.
You have to base it on what's the common opener, what's the creep route, what's the strategy, and then what do I want to do against it. Whereas that's kind of harder these days. So I think it's more important now to just have a general sense of how you want to play and then be more adaptive.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Have more of a understanding that you're not going to always face the same exact thing over and over again against your opponent. You have to go into it knowing that you're going to have to adapt and have that mindset going in. Whereas in the past, maybe you'd be like, oh my God, what is he doing? He's going mass raiders against me. I've never seen this in my life, or something like that. You might be more caught off by it. And there was one point you made earlier too that I definitely want to tag before I forget about it. But you mentioned this thing of, I think you used the word fuzziness before you play another race. I think that's something that's so cool that I've had people tell me about and talk to me about when they play one race at a very high level, and then they switch to another race. And although you may have understood the other race from your perspective, sort of across the hallway, seeing what they're doing, not until you actually play, say, for instance, if now you're playing Night Elf against a human player, when you switch from human to Night Elf, you don't actually understand. I think the main thing would be almost what's annoying for that race. Like, you as a human player may have sent a footman into a Night Elf player's base early game, attacked wisps, maybe never got any wisp kills, lost a footman, and be like, why the hell, why am I doing this? I'm not getting any wisp kills. And then you as a Night Elf player may face that and be like, oh my god, I'm about to lose my Ancient of War. My creeping is 10 seconds slower because I'm trying to save all these wisps. And I think there's a lot of little things like that. But did that really help you? Because that's something that I always advocate for newer players, is you should experiment with every race until you find your main race, because that'll help clear up this fuzziness, if you see what I mean.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. As far as how you experience it, I guess we can get into the advice there that you gave at the end, but definitely when you experience it from one side, like you said, I think that Footman Scout is actually a really good example. That's something that as a human player I did and didn't think anything of it. You know, it's just something you do. You send the Footman there, you right click a couple of wisps, you get to see if they're teching or not.
Yeah.
Or even like back in the day, we did scout farms. You do a really
Yes.
quick farm right next to the Tree of the Life to see if they were teching or not. And I did that, and I was like, oh, that's just what humans do. It's fine. But then I play Night Elf, and someone builds a farm next to my tree, and I'm like, oh, that's so annoying.
Yes.
He's going to see that I'm staying tier 1 now. Oh my god, and he's getting food from that. I can't waste any time killing it. Oh my god, it's so broken.
Right.
Or the Footman Scout, like you said. I mean, especially Night Elf, and you know, I always struggle with my multitasking micro. That's never been my strong suit. So you know, if you're trying to creep something big, and make sure the Ancient of War is not getting the last hit, building a Moonwell, and then also there's Footman running around in your base. I always use like 2 or 3 wisps to that Footman, because I'm terrible, and it's so annoying, and I never would have known how annoying it was unless I would have experienced it from the other side. Now, you don't have to experience it to like learn the game. The advice I would give, like if someone wants to start out, isn't like, I understand your point about like, you know, try every race and see what works out, but I would say, you know, just pick whatever you think looks fun or whatever you like,
right,
and then just go for it. Alternatively, like play one of the races that's easier for a new player. But it's also, it's a rare thing to actually switch race and try something different. Which I think is very negative. I think it's a shame that that's the case, because you know, a lot of people will stubbornly play that one side of the matchup and shout and cry and whine.
Yes.
About how broken something is, and I did that for a long time as human against Night Elf. I thought, oh, you know, there's no way human can win. It's so busted. It's so easy to play Night Elf.
Right.
And the most humbling experience I ever had was switching to Night Elf, and then it became my worst matchup. Night Elf against human was my worst matchup, and it probably still is. And it blew my mind, because human against Night Elf was also my worst matchup.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I suck at both of these sides? But somehow I did. And, you know, I think I learned a lot just from experiencing that. And I think the reason a lot of people don't switch is, you know, there's another aspect to it, which is you have a certain flow with your race. You know, especially army control, I think, is the biggest thing. If you play one race and you switch to another, you cannot control that army as well, nearly as well. And I think it puts you off immediately, and you'll go back. Like, you don't want to give it the time that it needs to actually learn how to control the other army.
Right.
But if more people if more people actually gave it an honest shot just to learn another race, I think we'd see a lot less whining.
Right.
In the community.
Yeah, and maybe if those skills you mentioned, the big army control and everything, maybe if that was more transferable and it was easier to switch races, do you think we'd see more people like Infi in the scene that are switching races depending on the specific matchups? Do you think that would be a more common thing? And do you think that'd be a healthy thing for the scene if everyone was always counterplaying each other and you had to do like blind race picks at the beginning? I suppose you'd have to do that sometimes in tournaments. Do you think that'd be a good thing overall for the scene? It would certainly be interesting from a competitive standpoint, but do you think it's a better thing that people are sort of locked into their specific races and have this identity? Or do you think it would still be as cool if everyone was switching races all the time?
Good question. I think there's almost this sense of race loyalty I've experienced.
Yes.
If you know what I mean. Like if
Yes.
you're a human player, then God damn it, you're a human player. You're not going to do anything else. I'm not
Yeah.
going to, you know, I got a lot of flack for switching. Certain, I'm not going to name any names here, but certain players to this day are like, oh, you should be, you're a human player. Come on, you shouldn't play these other races. What's wrong with you? I remember, I think famously Yumiko, the Chinese human player, uh, kind of looked down on TH and MP4 switching races around all the time. He's like, no, you should be one race. That's the honorable thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of BS. I think it takes a lot of skill to be able, even to off race just one matchup. I think it takes a lot of skill.
Yes.
So if you can do it, I think you should be able to. And back in the day, some cups and stuff would like force you to declare your race at the start of the tournament, and like you couldn't switch at all.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That always kind of annoyed me. Like it's so hard to actually have that skill set. So if you do, I think you should be able to use it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wouldn't be that fun if everyone all the time switched around, but that's probably never going to be the case.
No.
And, whenever we do see it, I think it's a lot of fun. Like players like Starbuck or like the Great Wall, and of course Infi and TH at the very top.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot of fun, and it can obviously be. I think it's different if you compare like race picking to playing random. They're kind of different things.
Yeah,
random. I always kind of hate random because I hate playing as random because you have usually one. Depending on what race you play, you might not even have a safe opener. You might just get wrecked by the RNG of what race they got. I think race picking is a lot more fun than playing random, which is what I tend to do. I'll play Orc against Human and Orc against Undead, but I'll play Night Elf against Night Elf and probably Human against Orc. Like I'll switch around like that.
Yeah. Did you, when you were playing Human, this is one thing also that I wanted to tag that you mentioned earlier, that you were talking about the whole mastering one strategy. Am I right in remembering that you only played Rifle Caster with Human back in the day? Or I don't mean to say you only played Rifle Caster, but it was you were trying to master the one strategy of Rifle Caster. Was that your style, similar to what the Huntresses were for a while there? It was Rifle Caster?
Yes, exactly. It was, even back then I had this weird notion in my head that I have to, I'm going to make this work in every matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I can't tell you why. It really it draws me in to try and get something to work, even especially if it's not supposed to work. Like mass hunts shouldn't work against undead back in the day, but I made it work, and that was a lot of fun. And Rifle Caster shouldn't work against orc back in the day. It shouldn't work against human, but if you can make it work, it's so satisfying. So that was my thing. I played. I think I had. Well, I had like almost like two. It was very binary because I was either playing fast expansion mass tanks, like super lane style.
Good, yeah.
Or I was playing Rifle Caster. Like I was doing one of those and I was kind of switching. But for the most part, Rifle Caster every matchup was my thing. And I had like an internal rule for myself, I remember at the time. Because back when I was playing Human, nobody played Rifle Caster. It was like an old school strategy. It was considered obsolete. Nobody at the top ever did it. Against Night Elf, you would always fast expand. Against Undead, you would always fast expand. And against Orc, you'd always do the caster push. Against Human, you would go double sank.
Yep.
So it just wasn't a strategy when I was. So that was kind of the appeal. I wanted to be a bit different. I wanted to see if I could make this work. So my rule was, I'm going to play Rifle Caster every matchup. I'm not going to make a single tower. I'm not going to make a single expansion. I gave myself these rules. I don't know exactly why. So famously, I never even built arcane towers, like not a single one to defend my base either. And I never expanded. And I just tried to get these Rifle Casters to work, which, it was already like an old school strategy against Night Elf and Undead. So I had something to base that off. But, trying to get it to work in Human Mirror and then against Orc was, that was kind of the beginning of trying to figure stuff out for myself without really having anything to base it on.
Yeah, there's something about that. I think the ultimate example of strategies like that, where you try to just perfectly optimize one build and try to dig in as deeply as you can for like just a simplistic build, I think it is almost Pally Rifles. I was talking to Thorsten about this. Like he said, it on the surface it seems simple. You're just building one unit. You're just building rifles. But even just, well, I'm sure there's lots of timings and stuff I don't know the nuances of, but the micro is almost limitless. If you practice this style with the Paladin, with the Blood Mage, there's always more optimizations, I think, especially with a Blood Mage, that you can do with the strategy. But it's cool to have this in such a limitless game, to have sort of a narrow scope on, I just need to master these couple of things, but these small number of things I'm mastering are limitless in and of themselves, which I think is a really cool way to view a strategy. I think I don't know if you agree. Pally Rifle's probably the ultimate example of that.
Probably, but I mean, the thing about Pally Rifles is you can't really do it in Human Mirror,
No,
and you
yeah,
can't really do it against Nidal. So it's like it's
yeah,
not something you could mindlessly do on ladder. Like you'd have to
yeah,
have different strategies. Like what I'm talking about is just doing that one. I mean, obviously I do variations of it
yeah,
depending on the matchup, but the core like rifle caster army would be like the center.
yeah.
Uh, but there's definitely some strategies. Like I mean, back in the day, Orc was like the prime example, I guess, of just raider, grunt raider walker every game.
Yeah.
Undead with fiends and statues to this day. Talking about you were mentioning a bit like new players and what they should do. I mean, that's one example where you could just say, well, just go play undead and do a fiend build. Because at the lower levels, you can do that in every matchup.
I always recommend that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you get a sense of a very clear tech timing because you got the Acropolis, and then you just tech up when you can. You have the guy that can heal and throw coils offensively, and you have these big units you can micro, and you can do it in every matchup. So it's kind of I think that was one of the things that drew me into this, and the idea of doing the same thing in every matchup is that it kind of transfers no matter what race you're playing against. So you kind of maximize your practice. If you
Right.
don't have a whole lot of time to play,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of makes sense that if you're doing something that you're going to do in every matchup, then you're getting practice every time you're going bear dryad against human. You're probably going to practice your bear dryad against orc too because it's similar.
Right.
So I think that was one of the ideas I had about it. Like I wanted to maximize my practice or whatever.
That totally makes sense. I think you're probably one of the few people that maybe I can get to be on my side. Did you like tanks back in the day? They're not too common anymore, but were you into the tanks when everyone was hating on them? Because I, for one, I like tanks, I like breaker mirrors, and I like destro mirrors and undead mirror, which especially Remo is always shitting on me when I say that. But were you a fan of the tanks back in the day? At least start there.
Well, I hate to rain on your parade, but
Oh,
I mean,
no.
the thing about I love tanks if I'm the one playing tanks,
I got you.
and
Yeah.
I hate tanks if I'm the Leonidas player on the receiving end or whatever.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a contradiction, but I think, and I think I said this back when I was on like a balanced talk show with Back to Warcraft.
Okay.
And,
Yep.
Spiral X Sword and Death Note,
Mhm.
and the Mountain Giant was going to get nerfed or whatever. And I said, well, I love the Mountain Giant. It's so much fun to play, but I understand and I accept the fact that everyone else hates it.
Right.
So for the good of the game, I will agree with everyone that it should be nerfed. Even though I like playing it, I think it's a lot of fun, but I understand that it's stupid.
Right.
And you can say the same thing about tanks. It's like it was a lot of fun to play, but yeah, it was really stupid. It shouldn't have been a thing for so long.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think that's a fair point of view on it too. Yeah. Because I'm only coming from a spectator point of view. Really, I'm never on the receiving end of tanks unless that 6 months I played undead. But
yeah. So that's another. In that case, I agree with you. I like watching tank games.
okay. Yeah.
It's a fun experience to just watch the game. I really love seeing all those towers go up and the tanks going up. It's fun. It's a bit different. However, not Breaker Wars. Breaker Wars is it puts me to sleep.
I think I'm alone on that one.
Yeah, I think so. I think you might be the only person in the whole world. I think so.
Human mirrors actually has always been very interesting for me because I like that there's very few strategies. It's always sort of breaker mirror, but then there's these cool little tier 3 strats that I've sort of enjoyed. So I've always really liked human mirror, and it's actually been one of the matchups that most people say it's boring to play and to watch. I've always really liked watching it, and I like playing it as well when I do play off race on occasion. But did you play Rifle Caster and Human Mirror? Or did you?
I played in that. Yeah.
Okay.
Every matchup.
Every single match. How did that
back in the
work?
day. It works surprisingly well. I should tell you.
Huh.
There's a build, and I stole it from. There's a player called Kemper, a
Yep.
Russian human player, very old school, and he played this way in Human Mirror, where he would go Rifle Priest, Archmage, Dark Ranger.
Okay.
And it sounds crazy on paper. It sounds crazy in theory, but it works really well because rifles, I mean, do a surprising amount of damage to anything, and as we can see in the games today, like focus fire potential is really huge, even if your opponent has breakers. But more so, if you have black arrows and rifles, you can very quickly kill their priests.
Okay.
And you're turning them into dark minions as well. So it's a timing push for sure. Like you're not going to win late game. You're not going to just play a creep game with rifles. It's a timing push. But with the Dark Ranger, you can kill the priest really quickly with focus fire and you get the skeletons. You can silence the priest as well, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine you start a fight by silencing all the priests, so they
Yes.
can't dispel anything, and then you start slowly focusing them down. And most importantly of all, since it is a tiny push, you're basically all inning them. If you all in their main and they bring all their presents into militia, then that's just free skeletons for you.
Right.
So that's kind of the idea behind it. It worked really well, really well.
Yeah, it's
And
probably
it's a lot of fun compared to the Breaker Mirror.
Yeah, I can imagine for sure. And that's probably one of those situations where people, you mentioned the calling of the militia and then you get a bunch of skeletons. It's like you almost want them to do it. It's one of those situations where people may not know what to do and then they do the wrong thing and then all of a sudden you have 20 skeletons in their base. So it's forcing them into an uncomfortable position. You know, why aren't you building breakers, dude? Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of, especially in Human Mirror, there's probably a lot of confusion when you don't build, even today, when you don't build breakers. It's probably the number one matchup, I would say.
I think that's a great point that you just mentioned. It's like I mentioned before, where you might play 100 games where your opponent calls a bunch of militia and you just have an easy win. But then you'll run into that one player who doesn't do it because he realizes, oh, I'm not gonna help you by giving you a bunch of militia. And then you maybe does something even smarter and you get stomped. And you're like, oh, does this actually work, or are all my opponents just really stupid?
Right.
And this guy really knew what to do. So there's always that. It's almost like on a knife's edge where you're never really sure if what you're doing makes sense or not.
Yeah,
but that specifically I stole from Kemper, so I mean he made it work pretty well for a long time. So I assumed it was pretty good.
Yeah, I do remember that name. I think he maybe a little bit more. He was around when I started, but I'm not sure how long he played for. That's actually something I wanted to touch on a bit too, because when I first I found that Rifle Caster guide, of course, and then I found your stream after that. I think 2014, around War 3 Arenas days. But I did want to talk about that because you seem to be really in the heart of those War 3 Arena days, and this might be maybe just me misremembering, like when you're a kid and you go to Disneyland, then you think for the rest of your life, man, I want to go back to Disneyland because it was awesome, but now I'm 25 and Disneyland kind of suck. But War 3 Arena just seemed like such a great time for, certainly not the North American scene being there. There was not very many players, but for the European scene, players like HLA, Yaz, you mentioned Rich already, Rudan, Cheshi, Orc Worker, people like those. It seemed like you guys had a really, although you do have a very strong scene, probably the strongest it's been with Happy and Foggy and all those guys. But War 3 Arena Days seemed really good. Did you have that sentiment back then? You had all these a lot of returning players and a sort of a deep pool of not just a couple of races like you might have nowadays. Of all the races had their really strong players. Did you feel that back then, or do you agree with that, or do you think maybe it was still a little bit of a dying scene, just like America was back then?
Well, I mean, you might have some rose-tinted glasses here, but I mean, as far as Warcraft dying, I mean that's pretty funny because it's been dying since day one.
Yes,
you know, like I've gone to like old forums from like 2003, and there'll be posts like, Warcraft's dying. So it's been dying since forever. Like whenever someone says Warcraft is dying, I don't know. I don't even care. It's not worth listening to. But certainly it was like. I remember how amazed I was at the idea because I mentioned, I was in contact with the guys making or developing W3 Arena before it even happened. Like when it was just an idea. Deathwing, who was like the replayers, you know, remember replayers.com or whatever?
Oh yeah.
He was the guy there, and he was the guy who did the W3 Arena along with some other guys. And he told me over Skype.
Okay, yeah.
We were talking about Skype and Discord, So, and he was like, well, I have this idea where like we'll have our own private ladder. It'll be through the normal Battle.net, but imagine that you just click a button and it'll instantly join a custom game for you, and you'll get your game that way. And I was like, that's never good. That sounds too good to be true.
Right.
But then eventually, that's basically what it was. You know, it was. An alternative, because you know the normal Battle.net, for people who don't remember back then, there's obviously the built-in delay, and it was infested with hackers. There was like lag hacks and drop hacks and map hacks. It was just garbage.
Yes.
So in that sense, it kind of gave players like me somewhere to play, because I was never really into custom games, and the very top players probably just played amongst themselves anyway. So like your only option was BattleNet,
Yes.
which really sucked for those reasons. So it definitely was like a savior for the scene
Mm-hmm.
to have an actual ladder with good players that was being monitored. They could, make sure there was no hacks.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like tournaments. Yeah, it was really, really cool. And there was the weekly cups. The player base, like the skill level today, I think is a lot higher, and the player base today is so much better. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
just looking at like DreamHack or whatever, like even the top 16 in Europe is like really, really good in my opinion. Uh, whereas back then, players, I'm not going to name any names obviously, but players who were considered pretty good back then, who could go pretty far in cups, they're like they wouldn't get past first round these days.
Yes.
Players who are still around. So the skill level is a lot higher, but it was more fun in the sense that Happy wasn't there.
Maybe that was it. Maybe that's all it was, really.
Yeah, because if there was a cup, there were the Gara Cups or whatever.
Yeah.
You didn't know who was going to win.
Mm-hmm.
It could be Rich, it could be Hawk, it could be Rudan, it could be Froggy, Sonic, HLA, Yaws. There's a lot of people who were true, or Orc Worker, like you mentioned, a lot of people who could make it to the finals, and it was a lot of fun to watch. Whereas, these days, Happy wins, and you know it from the start, and it's like nothing is Happy, of course. He's probably the best player of all time at this point, but it's just not fun when someone is so much better than everyone else. It's already a given that he's going to win.
Right.
So in that sense, it was a lot more fun back then.
Mm-hmm.
But Happy didn't show up until
2016, I think.
Yeah,
I think that was his first tournament was, I think, mid 2016 when he came back.
He wasn't that good when he came back. Like it took a while for him to become the Zombie he is now. So, but yeah, and every other aspect today is much, much better. And like W3 Champions is a lot better than W3 Arena.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, W3 Champions is amazing. I still can't believe it's a real thing.
Right.
Even though I play it.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that because being, it felt like I started playing the game. I didn't realize the lag was so bad on BNet because I was so new at the game. And then we had War 3 Arena, like before I barely knew how to play the game. So I guess I didn't realize just how big of a deal. How long were you actually playing for up until War 3 Arena came out on the laggy BattleNet? Were you playing from the very beginning of like 2002 or did you sort of come in a little bit later? Because you must have been grinding on that ladder for a long time before War 3 Arena, right?
Not really. I think I started pretty late
mm-hmm.
as far as competitive. Like I was never a competitive player. I mean, I got the game 2002.
Okay, yeah.
But I was playing custom games, tower defenses, 3-on-3 random team. Very, very little solo until probably like 2007.
Okay.
2008.
There was still Pro Ladder back then, right? If I'm remembering, on BattleNet.
Yeah. I remember that. That was a lot of fun to follow as well. Like seeing whoever got into top whatever. Yeah, but like my memory's a bit hazy. But I don't think I can remember a time where BattleNet felt like a good place to practice. There was always hackers. There was always delay. There was like a bad map pool. I think like 2 rivers. Like there's so many bad things about the old
Road to Strathholm. I remember playing on.
Yeah. So all these like second or third party solutions like W3 Arena and W3 Champions. I mean, they're amazing compared to what there was. But of course, the big downside is the vast majority of people have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Because unless you're a try-hard Warcraft player or fan or member of the community, then of course you'll know about it. But every single, like, how many people do you think go into normal BattleNet now and see, oh, there's still no ladder?
Yeah.
And then 1 year later, there's still no ladder. All right, I'm just going to uninstall this game.
Yes.
And they don't know about W3 Champions. And even if they did, they probably wouldn't care because they want the official thing. So that's always the big downside, is that as long as it's not official, it's always going to be smaller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate. Yeah, because I, for one, if I were to go to a new game, I always, for some reason, I don't know why I'm like this, but I always want the official of everything. I don't want to play on third party stuff. It's really only Warcraft that I do want. Like if I, for instance, a lot of people play like Diablo 2 mods. Not into it. I just want to play vanilla Diablo
Uh,
2. I don't want to play private servers. I want to play straight up because I don't know why, but that's always sort of what I
yeah,
viewed, which might be more common than I think. But do you?
it's exactly how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like except for Warcraft, because I like one example would be like Heroes of Might and Magic 3.
Yep.
I don't know if you know anything about that game,
Mm-hmm.
but it has a very, very dedicated community, mostly like Russian players.
Mm-hmm.
And they even made like their own fan expansion. They added like an extra race or whatever
Right.
to the game, an extra castle. And it looks really cool, but I'm never gonna get it. Like I don't care. I want to play Hero. I'm just gonna play the real thing, and that's how
Yes.
I feel about most things. So that's how most people probably feel about something like W3 Champions, where they're just like, nah, I don't care. And you have to download stuff. There might be a virus. I don't trust this and that.
Yes.
It's a shame. It's a shame for sure.
Yeah, it's probably because even I didn't think even there would be anyone else that would think that, but here I am, the one person I'm talking to right now actually felt the same way, so it's probably much more common than both of us think, which is unfortunate. And yeah, and the ladder's not even close to being out. Have they said anything? Don't even keep up to date, but have they said anything about the ladder? I remember I think it was July last year. Maybe I'm wrong in that. They said they had made that announcement with the screenshots. If you remember about the ladder, has there been anything else about the official ladder?
No, I think
Yeah.
I think when they did the last balance, they kind of blamed everything on COVID. Like maybe not outright, but they were like, these times with all these difficulties, blah blah blah. It's like, I don't know if I buy that as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
The one guy working on Warcraft still hasn't got the ladder ready.
Yeah. Are you because we both shared that sort of feeling about modded stuff. Would you play the ladder if say they come out and they have all the rankings and Grandmaster and stuff like that? And although the I guess the hosting would be a big issue in that, but do you think a lot of people would swap over? Would you, for one, swap over to like the Blizzard official ladder if they come out with that, or do you think War 3 Champions is pretty much going to be it for at least the time being, of course? Or do you think it'll be a big shift over? It's always an issue of what is actually best for the scene if that does happen. If they come out with a ladder, is it best that War 3 Champions, and this is open-ended, I don't know the answer, is it best War 3 Champions stick around and we have both ladders, or is it best they just dissolve and they just say, everyone go to the official ladder so that we're all together again? I don't know what the best option is, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I very much doubt that whatever ladder they'll eventually, if they ever do release a ladder, which I'm not even sure they will at this point, if they ever do, I very much doubt that it'll be even close to as good as W3 Champions.
Yeah, 100%.
It's going to be so much worse. They have they remastered StarCraft. You might know the StarCraft remastered.
Yep.
And I got the game, but just for the campaign. But I heard a lot of bad things about the multiplayer. Like there were so many server issues, ping issues, stuff like that. And that was a game that had a ladder at least. So imagine if they eventually release a ladder for Warcraft Reforged, it's probably going to be the same server ping issues, which W3 Champions has solved amazingly well. So whether or not they can coincide, I'm not even sure if they I don't know the legality of it all either. Like, I guess Blizzard could just step in one day and say, "Hey, you got to stop."
I don't think they're happy. Yeah, I don't think they're into it.
So if once they do release a ladder, they'll probably be like, "Oh, there's already this really weird unofficial ladder. Let's put a stop to it." So they might not even allow it. But if they do, it's probably good to keep it around just until we know how bad the real ladder actually is. Like, it might be amazing. Then we should all switch. But if it's terrible, it's good to have a backup for all the kind of more dedicated players to play.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up about the StarCraft remaster, because me, as someone, I bought it as well, and I played a little bit on the ladder, and I did hear from people other than yourself, and now I'm hearing from you, that there was some actual issues with the ladder, but as an outsider, I'm very, very much a beginner at Brood War. I didn't actually see any issues with it. I was like, when I got it, I was all happy. I was like, this is great. Like, Reforged is going to be incredible. But maybe that's just something that somebody maybe more in the scene would see all the issues with it. So players that are more involved in the scene everyone that's on War 3 Champions, for example, right now, will probably see all the issues with the ladder, whereas the people that are already on the outside looking in will probably even gravitate more towards the Blizzard. So then we're going to get probably more segregation, I would imagine, when if that sort does that sort of make sense once the ladder comes out, because they won't see the issues that players already on War 3 Champions will see, if you get what I mean.
I think I don't play StarCraft at all, so I don't know. But
yeah.
I think the issues were solved. So like if you went on and played recently, then I think it's fine.
Okay.
But I think what people were really complaining about was the fact that it was so bad at launch. It's kind of like with Reforged, it was super buggy. There's no ladder. Like all the hype is release day and maybe a couple days after. So if they botched that, then they kind of botched the game. And I think that's what people felt with StarCraft Remasters is like they didn't have a functioning ladder when it released. It took a long time to fix it, but now it's good.
Okay, I see.
And we haven't gotten there yet in Warcraft. We still haven't got that ladder, but maybe one day. But yeah, so hopefully they've learned something from that.
Yes.
But probably not, because like a lot of, I don't know. I think Grubby mentioned a couple of times like he was asked a bunch of stuff by Blizzard, and I think a lot of people in the scene were asked a bunch of questions probably about specifics, like what do you need, what about servers, what about ping, what's good, what's bad. I'm sure they got a ton of feedback and then they just seem to ignore it.
Right.
So I doubt very much that they'd learned any lessons from StarCraft Remastered either.
Yeah,
but maybe they have.
Something about game devs and release dates and releasing new games nowadays, because the whole No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk, all that sort of stuff, right? I don't know if you heard about any of those games, but they were disasters too, and they were and here we have with this really experienced game dev in Blizzard, and they can't seem to get it right either.
Yeah,
it's just I don't know what it is nowadays, but it seems like maybe, and again it might be the Disneyland thing, rose tinted glasses again, but it seemed like 15 years ago all the releases were good because you couldn't patch the games when they came out. You pay your $60 at EB Games, or I don't know what you have in Sweden for game stores, but like you go, you buy it, you get the disc, you put it in your computer, and it just works, and they don't have to patch it. On occasion, you'd have to get a rebate, and they'd send you a new disc. But something about this whole just download it online, buy it in our online store has ruined these access, or these newly
pre-orders and stuff like that.
Pre-orders, exactly, yeah.
And I think for Blizzard specifically, it's even more noticeable because like their whole reputation back in the day was how good they were with taking their time and releasing a polished, finished product. But today it's the opposite, So Blizzard today, I mean, it's Blizzard in name only, I suppose you can say.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's enough of the depressing Reforged stuff, but something much more exciting. I do want to talk a little bit about the recent patches, because I had a question that I think applies honestly mostly to you, and then maybe to some NA boys like OC comes to mind, FA comes to mind. The hunt players, the true and tested hunt players. When this keeper patch came out, I'm not exactly sure on the 1.30 when it was very much strong, everyone going keeper. Did you almost feel it was a direct buff to Night Elf, but did you almost feel it was an indirect nerf to you as a player? Because now all of a sudden you're playing this unique style, you're playing this keeper, Potom hunts, and now keeper gets buffed, huntresses get buffed, and now everyone's playing it. Now Moon's playing it, and the replays that people didn't have before to counter it, now suddenly they have thousands of replays. Every player's playing it. Did you feel, although your race and your strategy got stronger with that patch, did you feel that almost you as a player got nerfed?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And I think Scott, the Swedish player, he always called me a hipster because when they did finally buff the huntresses that much, I started playing Demon Hunter. I started playing archers and lords and stuff because I wanted to. It was like the new challenge. It's like, okay, obviously they're pushing this kind of keeper hunt stuff on us, and that's what I did that for years, before they buffed it. So now I'm going to be different. I'm going to do the Demon Hunter stuff,
right? Which
was really hard back then because they had still the busted entangle.
Yes,
but yeah, it definitely felt. I mean, on the one hand, yes, it felt like a nerf to me, but it was also a lot of fun seeing what Moon would do with
Yes.
this. What would
Yeah.
Lalai do with this?
Absolutely.
Now that we have these tools, how are they going to do it? What did I miss back in the day? Like,
Hmm.
and also like, oh my God, how weak were Huntresses back in the day? Because now we're so used to the Moonglaive at tier 2.
Hmm.
We had the Sentinels for free at one point as well.
Yep.
Like they were so much stronger than what they used to be, and I'm like, I wonder how I could even win games back in the day
Mm.
without those things. Like
Right.
especially the Moonglaive upgrade. I think.
What sort of stuff did you mentioned now I get to see what Moon and probably like Laliat and stuff are doing. Is there anything that pops out that they were doing that you were like, wow, I never thought I could do that even with the weaker overall race back then? Was there anything that really popped out to you when they started doing it?
No, that's sadly that's what I realized is like it's a really good thing. Or it was a really good thing that this wasn't the meta
Right.
because mass hunts is very limiting.
Mm.
If Moon plays mass hunts or if like Joe Schmo plays mass hunts, I don't really see a difference. Like, you know
Right.
what I mean? I don't really. It's not. I don't want to see Moon play mass hunts.
Hmm.
I want to see Moon do Moon things with Moon strategies that are really hard. Like the reason I played mass hunts is because it was so easy. Like
Hmm.
it kind of. And I guess we'll get into orc and stuff. But my principle is typically I want to compensate for my bad micro. I want to compensate for my bad multitasking. So I want to find a way around. I don't want to play the straight up micro wars. So mass
Right.
hunts really worked well for me in that regard. But I don't think Moon needs to do it. I want to see Lalaya do it or Colorful. All those guys do it over and over again.
Right.
And I'm so sick of it now. It's so like I can't watch Night Elf against Orc.
Mm.
The Keeper Alchemist hunts. It's so boring.
Yeah, and Moon is one of the I think few night elves that is purely going keeper hunt archer alchemist still.
Every single game, yeah.
Yeah, and at least we get from I think mostly colorful. He's going demon hunter on occasion and stuff like that. Do you think Moon is because Moon is the night elf player that I imagine all night elf players look towards for the guiding light, what to do? That he's probably still considered the best from most night elves' point of view. Do you think maybe he's a little bit stubborn and not switching to against at least Orc? I'm thinking more like Lores, Winds, Keeper Talons has been very common. On LR, going Demon Hunter Talons has become more common. Do you think he should do more varied strategies on occasion, or do you think it's still like this is what he should be doing every time?
I'm not gonna give Moon any advice. That'd be very pretentious. But yeah, I get your point. I think like lures are probably the future for this matchup. I think lures have a lot of potential, but Moon does Moon things, and I'll never understand it, and I don't think anyone ever is going to understand it.
Right.
Like you mentioned, all knives looking to Moon, but I never watch Moon replays to learn.
That's
I
very
never
interesting.
look at
Yeah.
him at all
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I don't understand him.
Right.
And he seems to have so many variations in his strategies and timings. And he seems to, at times, like you were mentioning, Happy was like, I just do it sometimes. I feel like that's what Moon does sometimes.
Right.
He'll play like a best of five, where he just goes Demon Hunter Talons. Out of the blue, he'll do that a whole best of five. And then the next best of five in the same tournament, he'll go Keeper Hunts.
Right.
And I'm like, there's no rhyme or reason. He's just doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even try. I don't even. It's kind of like with Foggy as well. I don't watch Foggy replays to learn because I feel like he does the same thing where he's just varying himself so much, and there's so many things they're doing that I don't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to like learn, I'll watch Colorful or something like that. Some
Right.
guy who just does the thing they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But some players. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a similar thing for Orc, at least from my point of view, with comparing Lin to Fly. Of course, Lin is sort of the Moon of Orcs from a skill point of view, but he does have a much more understandable style. Whereas Fly, when I watch his replays, especially against Night Elf, because he, I think, is considered the best Orc against Night Elf player in the world currently, he just does crazy stuff all the time. He makes plays that no one can make. The meme of losing his Blade Master may be a little overdone at this point, but that's exactly what he does. He goes for the crazy flashy stuff, and he does the very intuitive plays all the time. So it's very hard to emulate what Fly does, whereas maybe Lin, where you made the comparison to Colorful, maybe Lin for Orcs could be the Colorful, where you can actually break down what they're doing, reverse engineer, figure it out, find the step by step. Although you can never be Lin, but yeah, I think Fly is almost kind of the Moon side of things for Orc. Did you find that? Because you mentioned you've been studying some Orc replays. Do you find that as well?
Well, honestly, the only orcs I watch are the ones I know that like to lame.
Okay,
So
cool.
I don't really watch fly replays.
Hmm.
I watch Linguagua and Xiaokai and those guys.
Linguagua is
Not the
so
best.
good at it, man. He's so good at
Yeah.
laming. Yeah.
So those are the, like, they might not be the best players in the world, but they're the ones who do that style. So I don't watch that many like straight up orc games, honestly, because I'm
Hmm.
not really that interested in playing that style.
Hmm.
But I know what you mean about Fly. He's a very special player in that
Hmm.
sense. Uh, and he does. I mean, it's a meme for a reason. He does lose that Blade Master a whole lot.
Yeah.
He just keeps doing it. But I think it's also like trying to play towards perfection. Like he wants to get the
Yes.
very most out of that Blade Master. Even if it's 1 HP left, he's going to get that last hit
Hmm.
and try to keep him alive. But to do it in like a serious tournament finals or whatever, it's crazy. But he does it.
Yeah, it almost makes him look very inconsistent, but really he's just playing like a hyper difficult style purposefully almost. And it's like, oh, if I get that one more hit, maybe I get the crit on that hit or something like that. But yeah, Linguagua, I've heard Hitman say is probably the best lame player. I call it lame. I don't mean to to have
Yeah, no,
yeah, you know. But
I
yeah,
think it's an acceptable terminology.
all right, good,
We
good.
all know what it means, laming. Yeah, yeah.
All right, yeah. So he's probably the best lame player out there, Linguagua. Do you watch it all? Because Hitman is the other players, Linguagua and Hitman that I've seen. You mentioned Zhao Kai. I haven't actually seen many of his games. You watch Hitman at all? Because he does do quite a bit of laming himself. Actually, he's one of the few of those orc players that still lames
He, yeah, he does it against Demon Hunter,
against
as
Demon
far as
Hunter.
I've seen. And
Yeah,
against Demon Hunter, how do I put this? You don't need to watch replays to learn
it's
how to lame
easy.
against Demon Hunter. It's
You could
very,
say it's
very
easy. Yeah,
easy.
for sure. Yeah.
That's how, back in the day when because I off-raced Orc a bit back in the day as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I always wanted to play against Night Elf because it
Mm-hmm.
was so fun to lame against Demon because you can just go Wyverns, Bats, whatever.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons. Like this meta is actually very bad for laming because like a lot of the standard stuff just kind of happens to hard counter it. Keeper archers just kind of hard counters lame. You can't really lame against it.
Right.
But against demon it's very very easy.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's
What
get
was the
into.
question? I can't.
Oh,
Did I
just
answer the question?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just asked
Yeah.
it if you watch any. You say you watch Linguagua, Zhao Kai, and then I think the other orc that lames is Hitman. So I asked if you
Oh
watch
yeah,
any
yeah.
Hitman for the laming stuff. But yeah,
I think we should mention like the all-time great lamer is Imphi, for
yes,
sure for me at least.
yes.
His orc laming is probably my biggest inspiration, even though he doesn't play
It's
anymore.
too bad
I
there's not
haven't
many
seen.
replays of that because there's those few
Yeah.
really nice games that he played against Happy that I saw. I think on ladder was most of them. But yeah, he has an incredibly strong like a Farseer Shadowhunter lame style that I've seen in the
Yeah.
past. It's just a shame there's not a lot of replays for that. But he really is just a special player in that.
And he does it with every race. If he
Yeah.
plays random, no matter what race he gets, no matter what matchup, he's gonna lame.
Mm-hmm.
He's gonna annoy you a lot.
Yes.
That's just what he does. It's very inspirational.
Mm-hmm. To touch on that point, you mentioned Happy probably being the best player of all time. Do you think I thought it was a shame during the War 3 Champions finals that we saw Fly sort of, although it was very hype, Exlord was able to beat him so dominantly. I thought it was a real shame that Fly didn't make it to the grand finals because I think Happy's kryptonite, and this might be orc bias speaking, is these top orcs that might be able to lame him out a little bit. I think Infi playing orc could definitely beat him. I think Lin, maybe Fly if he's playing well, but do you share that, or do you think Happy when there is these cross regional tournaments on at least even ping, maybe LAN, I guess would what it would be? Do you think he'll be able to defeat these orcs nowadays? Because he couldn't in the past some of the time.
Yeah, I think orc is definitely the only race that can beat Happy.
Right.
Even like kind of middle of the road. Like I've seen Cooper have a lot of close games against Happy in the past.
Right.
With this kind of semi-lame style.
Yes.
So I think it's definitely, and if you go up against Lin or someone like that, he can definitely lose. But every other race, I don't think he can lose against anyone really.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't seem like he can. I did watch your series last night against Happy. That's almost it's kind of funny how Happy's so good that we end up talking about times that we are able to take a map off of him, but it really is that. I mean, this guy's like he 3-0s Foggy every single week. But
Yeah.
I do want to talk about this series because I watched it last night and Well, you could take me through it a little bit if you remember it. I expect that maybe you'll do some analysis on it on your YouTube or something. I think it'd be worthwhile to have some orc shaped analysis there. But yeah, so map one, Tide Hunters.
It was the ESL Cup, right?
ESL is 67, I
Yeah.
think. Do you remember it very well, or?
I'm trying to, because I've played ladder games against them as well. I'm trying to think of the. It was Tide Hunters, and then it was, what was the second map?
Northern Isles.
And then third map was,
I believe Concealed Hill, I believe. I'm trying to remember.
Was it Autumn Leaves? I'm thinking it might be Autumn Leaves.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, Autumn Leaves. You're right. Yeah.
Yes, I think I remember now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. I'll.
Yeah. So you win map one with full lame. You get towers up. You have Wind Riders. I believe you went Farseer's Shadow, and he pushes your expo. You have 4 towers building. You kill a couple fiends. He leaves. What I found very interesting was watching it from his perspective. He stands up and he walks out of the room after he GG's out. He walks out and then he comes back, and you say, although this was just funny from my perspective, I don't think you were doing anything on purpose, but you say he sits back down and you say 1 minute please. So what we were joking about, me and Beta, was you iced Happy after you were up 1-0 against them. But then watching that, so you beat him in game 1. Game 2 on Northern Isles, you seem to be in actually a very, very good position. I think you were even up 10 supply, and then Happy did Happy things, which is very difficult to out micro Happy with Wind Riders, because sort of the micro is all in his hands. But if you remember that game at all, do you think that you had a good chance that game, or maybe was I thinking you were more ahead than you were?
Yeah, no. I was probably more ahead in that game than the first game that I actually ended up winning. Like at one point, I remember, let me see here, Northern Isles. I remember I was down like by his natural. My expansion was already up or going up.
Yep.
And we were like, I was ensnaring statues, killing statues, and he surrounded my Shadow Hunter with 4 skeletons.
Yeah.
Such a happy thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's where the momentum shifted. If I just didn't get surrounded there. And I remember I had like a greater healing or something like that, health stone. So I was very carefree about the surround. I'm like, I'll just pass the thing and it's fine. But I still, like, I passed it and used, I think, and I still had to TP out because he kept us around.
Right.
Typical Happy things. And that's where it kind of turned around. But even then, I remember I took a bad fight because he expanded. Yeah, he did a like late counter expansion, and I was massing wyverns. And we were like, I was creeping the lab, and I saw him coming, and I was pretty sure in my head that he must be 50 supply.
Right.
Like, there's no way he's gonna break too early, and I was at like 66 or whatever. So I'm like, I'll take this fight. But then I looked at the replay after, he was like 58, and it just got that army. So I'm like, that was the absolute worst time that I should have fought. I should have just waited for a little bit more because he was already in low upkeep. So it was just an unfortunate kind of. I read the situation wrong, and he of course out-microed me pretty badly. Which is like you said, like if you're playing wyverns and they have web and stuff, everything's in the undead hands.
Yeah.
Like if he's good enough, he can win most situations almost. Like if your happy level is good. But if you're not happy, you'll probably get wrecked by like that's the kind of thing with wyverns. It's like on the one hand, I can't do much to affect it, but on the other hand, you know, unless my opponent's really really good, they're probably going to win because they're just like stupid that way.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool because I heard about, I hadn't actually watched the series yet, but I heard about the going up 1-0, and then I watched the clip of Happy sort of standing up, which I'm over exaggerating, of course, but he stands up and walks out and comes back in, and you say 1 minute. I saw that, but I didn't actually watch the rest of the series because I figure, you know, you go up 1-0, and then Happy being Happy, he adjusts, and he probably, you know, in the next couple games, he might just dominate you. But like map 2, like it was very, very close to the orc-shaped 2-0ing Happy, and it's like, it's very impressive for anyone to be able to beat Happy, but for you with a newly acquired off race to almost be able to 2-0 him is pretty crazy to me. And then also you had that very exciting game. You must remember this, the Tide Hunters game against X-Lord, which I can't remember how that series went, but you had that crazy game, which I think is, you know, although I say that maybe we might be alone, or I might be alone in liking tanks and lame stuff, but I think that is the one game, your game against X-Lord and Tide Hunters, that made people go, all right, I kind of like this whole lame strat. I think this is pretty
Mhm.
entertaining because it's really cool. I think honestly, players don't want to see it anymore, I'm sure, but I think everyone watching the game, they would love to see more players play that sort of style. Do you share that, or and you have any thoughts about that game against Xlord at all? Do you remember that very well?
Mm. Yeah, so I feel the same way as far as laming goes. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm the one laming or if I'm watching, it's a lot of fun.
Yes.
But if I'm getting lamed, it sucks. So there's always this duality. Uh, but I remember the series against X Lord. I remember I was like, I don't know. I wanted to entertain. I guess I kept on laming.
Yeah, you had the green screen up with the towers and stuff too, as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but once I had like three bases and stuff, like if I at any point had just made an army,
Mm,
I would have won so easily.
right.
So, like after the game, because my thinking, I think, was okay, somehow I managed to get into this winnable position,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to win the series. Like he's
Mm.
too good. So I'll have as much fun as I can here. Just exaggerate the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Keep making bats, keep making towers.
Mm-hmm.
But if my life was at stake in winning that game, then I would have
Mm-hmm.
after the third base just go 100 food wyverns,
Mm-hmm.
bloodluster wyverns, whatever, and you can just attack them and win. Uh, and I didn't think much of it then, but then game two, I got 2-0'd. But game two, I was really far ahead as well
Mm.
because he did like a Crippler expansion, and I actually kind of stopped it. Like I pushed
Right.
it down. Then I tried to all in his main, and I was too eager to keep pushing, and I lost. But I was still, in my opinion, I was in like a very commanding lead.
Right.
So after the series, I remember thinking like, wow, I could have actually won 2-0 if I played properly game
Mm.
one. I actually made an army. I would be up 1-0, and what if I played a little bit better game two? I could have won 2-0. So I was like a little disappointed
Mm.
afterwards because I like, well, he's not as untouchable as I thought he was,
Right.
with my off race.
Yeah.
Because when I play Night Elf, I never beat him.
Right.
I never ever beat him, and I've had games against him where I'm like 80 food and he's like 20. Like I'm super far ahead. I've all but won the game, and he somehow always comes back against me.
Mm.
So like I've never beat him with Night Elf. So I think that's why going into it, I was like, I'm not going to beat him with Orc.
Mm.
Uh, so I kind of threw that series, I would say, unfortunately.
Do you think that this style that you're doing, Farseer, I believe you go 6 headhunters, dual beast raiders, and you get an expo with towers into wind riders. Do you think this is a very strong style that you're playing, or is it just that these players, Happy, Xlord, although it's weird to say that, might not know exactly what to do against it quite yet? Or do you think this is actually a sustainable style that maybe other orcs could work on and maybe try to take the ball and run with it, so to speak?
I think it's hard to say, especially when you're like off racing,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the like we were talking at the start of this, about why one would switch or like try a new
Yes.
race, and one reason I didn't really mention is when you learn a new race or switch to a new race, everything's kind of new and you have a lot of excuses
Mm.
because if I lose a game as Night Elf, I know exactly I know what I should have done,
Oh,
and I
yes, I
didn't do
see.
it. So
Yes.
I'm like, oh, I lost. I can only blame myself. But if I lose a game now with Orc, I can just go, I didn't know what to do. I've
Right.
learned
Yes.
something. So it's very comforting in that sense. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's not my fault. I'm still learning the race.
Right.
But that'll only carry you so far because eventually you'll be good enough that you can't make that excuse anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm still in that stage with Orc where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing really. I'm just figuring stuff out. So if I do lose a game, I don't immediately think, oh, I've been hard countered. I just think I
Mm-hmm.
haven't figured it out yet. But I think it's a solid style. I think it's fairly almost old school. I think a lot of this is what people did way back in the day,
Mm.
is try to get an expansion up, especially against undead. Farseer TC.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not with double beast like that, but still, like in theory, I think it's fine because the Farseer Headhunter build order made everything a lot easier.
Yes.
And I guess that's what I wanted. That's why I started playing a bit of work because I'm like, fuck it, let's go mass headhunters. It seems so easy. Again, back to that, like, oh, it looks so easy, it's so stupid, so busted. Right. And then once you actually try it yourself, you see a lot of things that you didn't realize. But I mean, that's why I started to begin with. It's just we have this kind of universal build order that you can do against every race.
Yes.
And it's almost like the antithesis of Night Elf. Because when you play Night Elf, in my experience, there are so many things that can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things that can annoy the hell out of you. You can get harassed in so many different ways. You can get rushed. You can get all in, like two crypt ghouls, tower rush. Like there's so much that can happen to you in just the first couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go Farseer Headhunters, there's nothing in the world that you have to worry about.
Uncheesable.
I don't even scout. Like I don't care. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's so relaxing in that sense, knowing that there's nothing my opponent can do. Fire Lord, Tower Rush, I'll just laugh it off. You know, whatever happens, I have the most solid opener in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's super easy to micro.
Yeah.
So it appealed to me a lot in that way. But the follow-up, I remember, I might be rambling now. You'll have to stop me.
No, you're good. Keep going. Keep going.
But I remember I did, like when I never really switched to Orc in the sense of like doing a bunch of ladder games and then trying it out in a cup or whatever. I just immediately thought, I know what I do. This looks so easy.
Right.
So I had like a clan war or some best of 3 against Thunder, the Korean human, and I just kind of improvised my way, playing Farseer Headhunters, and I knew that you're supposed to get Shaman and like a Kodo. You know, I was playing standard Headhunter. I got just wrecked because again, I got into that situation where I can't control this army.
Right.
With Night Elf, I have a very good flow. I know what to do. With this Orc army, I just freeze up, and there's like a clap and a blizzard. Everything's dead. I'm like, oh god damn it.
Yeah.
So I GG'd out there, got 2-0'd really easily. And from that grew this idea of like, well, how can I simplify this?
Right.
How can I win without microing? That's always kind of what I want to do.
Well, that should be the ultimate goal, though, because Yaz used to say micro can only win you games you weren't supposed to win. So I think that should be the ultimate goal almost.
Well, I mean, certainly for me at least, because I've always felt that my micro is a lot worse than my opponent most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's why I masked hunts, because my thinking at the time was, you know, if I'm going bears and my opponent's going bears and he's a high level player, he's going to win because we have the same amount of bears and I can't micro, I'm just attack moving. So why would I get into that situation to begin with? No, I'm going to mass hunts.
Right.
And I'm going to expand and I'm going to make sure that I have like 40 more food than my opponent. So that way, if I just attack move, I'm still going to win because I just have the numbers.
Yeah.
So I kind of had the same thought process after that best of 3 against Thunder. Like, what can I do with this so that I don't have to micro, so that I can actually get an advantage without having to micro?
Yes.
And I think I just improvised at one game. Like, okay, I'll stop Predator production at 29. I'll get Double Beast. And I'll use, how do I put this? I'll use the Headhunters as a means to an end. You know, I'm not going to base my strategy just Headhunters from start to finish. I'm not going to go Berserkers, blah, 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 which is what most people would do. I'm just going to use it as a means to an end. I want to get to the point where I can start laming. And I think the Headhunter opener is probably the best way to do it because you have a super solid early game. And then once your second hero is out, you can creep really quickly because you have all that piercing damage. And if you do add Raiders and you kept all your Headhunters alive, that's amazing synergy. You know, you have Ensnare and Focus Fire. And you can use that kind of the strength of that army to almost bully your opponent while you're expanding. Or teching up and building a bunch of towers and getting it tiny, you know, stuff like that. I forget what the original question was. But,
I was just asking you if you thought it was viable past a certain point
right.
against these top players.
But, and so far, the answer is yes, but there have been, again, it's always this kind of ebb and flow of winning a bunch of games very easily and thinking, I've solved the meta. This is easy. And then running into this kind of wall. I haven't run into the wall yet. In some sense, I have in some matchups. Like against Night Elf, I don't even do it. I don't think Headhunters works against Night Elf, for example. I don't even try it anymore. But against Undead and against Human, so far I haven't run into anything that's like made me think that it's not viable.
Right.
And it's very, very flexible. I think that's what people might not understand or might underestimate. Like it's not predictable, which would be the death of the strategy. If it was always the same thing, like especially you were mentioning Happy and that best of 3. Happy kind of learned along the way because I was doing a very greedy expansion. I don't know if you remember this, but I expand during my tech, which is very greedy.
Yeah, and he just blind ran there in the second game.
Yeah, of course. And if that was the crux of the strategy, like if that was everything I had was this greedy expansion,
Right.
then yeah, I would have been hard counter and I'd have to give up. But that's just one variation.
Hmm.
I can do that. I can expand it tier two. I can go tier three and get a tiny. I can keep making raiders and add bats, or I can switch quite quickly into wyverns. Like there's so many variables and variations to this
Hmm.
in both against undead and against human that I think it's very, very solid.
Right.
And I think it'll come down to, we also have to remember that games can be won with skill as well and lost with skill.
Hmm.
So like it might be tempting to, if you lose a game, to say, oh, this doesn't work.
Hmm.
But maybe you just got out micro. Maybe your opponent just played a lot better and it's
Right.
a viable strategy. Which, going back to when we were talking about standard and off meta strategies,
Hmm.
that's one of the securities you have of playing standard is even if you get wrecked by someone, you lose really badly. You're never going to blame the strategy because
Right.
this is what everyone does.
Yes.
So you're just like, I must have played poorly. Whereas if you played mass hunts against undead and you got stomped,
Yes.
maybe you would ask yourself the question, oh, is this just not going to work?
Yes.
Whereas if you play standard, you're always just going to say, well, Moon does it.
Yes.
Infi does it. It works. I just have to play better. So in that sense, what I'm doing, I think people have started doing it more and more. I don't know. Like I don't want to claim anything. I hadn't seen anyone do it,
Hmm.
but now that maybe it's just the
I
fact
haven't
that
either.
yeah, but now that I'm looking around, I'm seeing a lot more like Linguaga is doing it too.
Hmm.
Headhunters into two beast.
Yep.
Shao Kai is doing. Like, people are trying it more and more, and I think it is just pretty solid overall. I mean, bestiary units are kind of busted. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I was wondering at first that was going to be my follow-up question, but you definitely covered that. Was I was wondering, there's this idea that, okay, I'm going to switch to Orc because Farseer Headhunters is very strong right now. I don't think it's any secret that Farseer Headhunters, there was Keeper patch, and then there's Crippler patch, and now we're sort of going into the Farseer Headhunters patch. But at first, at face value, when you switch to Orc, it looks like you're doing it because of that. But then I go and watch your game, and I'm like, wait, he's playing this a lot differently. He's going Shadowhunter sometimes second, no TC. He's going to two Beast Raiders. So my question was going to be, why did you switch away from the most standard, whatever, one Bestiary Raiders against Undead or Shamans against humans, stuff like that, into Grunts? But I think you kind of covered that. And the one thing you mentioned about sort of it being a little bit unpredictable, I think many people were predictable with it for a long time. I think players like maybe Kiwikaki, when players like Fly and Soen were doing it when it first started becoming more popular, they were very predictable. They were always going tier 3, and they were always trying to make the end game be these headhunters into berserkers that they make and get bloodlust and all that. But I think the best way to play it, and this is a similarity to how you're playing it, is what Lin was doing, that he showed us in the regional finals, when he would transition into grunts and he would go back into standard after opening with 6 headhunters, and he would use these to sort of pressure in the early game, power creep, of course, because they're way better than grunts, and then he would pivot it in to a standard grunt shaman Kodo army, which is a similar thing to what you're doing. You're just pivoting into sort of more of a lame style or more of a mass windrider style. But I think that is, in my opinion, from what I've seen, probably the best way to play Farseer Headhunter, is not to just full commit into berserkers with bloodlust with 3/3 upgrades and all that. Do you agree? I think you did sort of touch on that a little bit, but is there still some viability to the fully committing to only headhunters that some people have done in the past?
I think there is. I think they're both viable, and I think the fact that you can do both is one of the strengths as well.
Yes. Okay.
So you don't really know, but also like it might be evidence that headhunters are a bit too strong. The fact that you can do this opener, and it seems to just be the best opener.
Yes.
Because if you ask yourself, like that's what I asked myself the question, like when would I ever go grunts? In what situation would it be better to do like a two burrow grunt tech if I want to go Farseer? And the conclusion was, well, there's no situation I would ever do that. Maybe on some maps, and maybe sometimes I'll do a fast tech. That's still viable, like a one burrow tech and stuff like that. But if you're just comparing grunts to headhunters are just, they seem to be better in every single way. Like there's no reason you wouldn't go headhunters. Except maybe against Night Elf.
Yeah, there was one strat, I believe, where you can go like one grunt and then go into headhunters, which we see sometimes, but it's not too common. I think it's if you want to creep level 2 and then counter a fast expansion from a human. You see it on occasion, but it's still you're still going into headhunters, and that's
Yeah.
actually there was Save Orcas was asking earlier in the chat, and I told him I would remember because he had to go. He asked, "Do you think headhunters should be nerfed?" Which I think you touched on, and how would you actually nerf them if you had to pull
I
the
would just
trigger?
go. I would revert the range
The
buff
range.
because
Hmm.
I feel like that. I think that happens sometimes in Warcraft where they'll buff something, and once you buff something, people want to try it,
Hmm.
and then they realize, wow, it's really strong. But I think headhunters they were strong before. People just didn't play them. And I think
Hmm.
now that we know how strong they are, I would think it would be interesting to see what happens if they just revert the range buff and see if people still make it work.
Right. Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like because right now they're kind of ridiculous. I think the range is too, like they have. I'm not really sure what the difference is when I think about archers, but I feel like I don't know this specifically, but I feel like it's a lot easier to control the headhunters.
Right.
Like the attack animation, it's so much easier to stutter step them to, with archers they feel
Hmm.
so clunky and weak, but headhunters they're so smooth and easy to use, and they
It might be
do
like a,
so
a
much damage.
turn rate thing or something
Yeah,
like
it
that.
might be something.
Yeah. Yeah, some weird one of those weird stats that never get changed at all, but might just intrinsically be strong to the unit. Which is
Yeah,
what exactly was it? 100 range buff they got? Because archers is 600 to 700 with the upgrade. Headhunters are 550 right now. What are they? 600 right now? I totally forget what the actual numbers are. Do
they
you
used to
remember?
be 450,
Okay, yeah.
so I think they should be 550 now.
550. Yeah. So it was 100. Yeah. So and 100 is actually quite a bit when you see it in
Yeah.
game. And
Oh, yeah.
when you talk about micro ability, which is all about kiting in the early game, like you mentioned, I think I think range would be the big thing. I mentioned some people said in the chat like they should be force supply, but like maybe they could have a longer build time. Maybe they could cost 20 gold because it's also the idea that you can it's such a big commitment to get 2 grunts. It takes such a long time. But whereas getting 6 headhunters, you have 6 headhunters before your tech finishes. I think your 6 is popping like right before your tech finishes with the 2 burrow tech. So it's just the fact that you have this mass. Like I think you have a stronger army than any other race, other than maybe if an undead's going like fast fiends or something. I believe you
Yeah.
do have the best army.
It's also the fact that the war metal only costs gold.
Mm.
So every other race, if you want to get like quick rifles or quick fiends, well, I guess the same thing with fiends. The graveyard doesn't cost any wood. But if you compare it to like quick huntresses or quick rifles, it's a
Yep.
really big commitment to get that structure. But the war mail, it's just gold.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not saying they should, but if you did add a wood cost, that would also be a big incentive not to get early war mail.
Right, for sure. Okay, I think I'll ask you one transitioning question, and then I'll ask the chat if they have any questions. So if you guys have any, type them out, and then we'll, within reason, and we'll get Starshaped to answer some of them. But the transitioning question would be, and you can be as honest as you want with this. If you were to rank the races right now with the most recent patches being nerfed, Wisps got nerfed, Mountain Giants got nerfed, and a couple things have been buffed and changed. Undead's had some nerfs as well. How would you rank the races currently if you had to? Which might be tough to do. I know it is for some people. They don't exactly know. In some races, is sometimes tied. You could say in the past maybe human and night elf were tied back in the very very far days, and maybe undead and orc have been tied at some point. But if you had to, do you think you'd be able to do it?
I think it's almost never worth it to talk about balance in that and just like what race is strongest.
Specific matchups, you're thinking?
Yes, I think matchups are a lot more worth talking about, like if something is too strong or too weak. But if I had to just talk about races in general, I'd probably go human, undead, orc, night elf.
Human, undead, orc, night elf.
It might be my bias though, because I always think human is really strong. But I feel like, I just feel like human is always the strongest race. Even when undead is kind of bullying them, I still feel like human is kind of busted.
Yeah, I guess the one way you could do it is to count like good matchups that they have. So like, maybe you could say orc has a good matchup currently against like human, I would say, and maybe like undead, and then human has a good matchup against night elf, of course, and then I guess they're a little bit stronger against undead, but I would always do it like count the good matchups. If you have 3 out of 3,
Yeah,
maybe
no,
you're
no,
the
that's one
strong.
way.
But it's not always true because there's always biases that come in. Like maybe you would say to me, being mostly a Night Elf player, that maybe Orc is favored against Night Elf, but then I, as an Orc player, would say, oh, I think Night Elf's favored against Orc, and we would go back and forth and back and forth. But
Yeah, yeah. But I think we can be kind of objective here
mm-hmm.
because, well, I don't know, maybe you'll disagree with me, but if we look at Night Elf, I think they have a bad matchup against human, they have a bad matchup against orc, they have a bad matchup against undead. Not by a whole lot.
Right.
I think all those 3 matchups, they're kind of not as bad as I used to think they were, but they're all in favor of the other race slightly. So I think that puts them as the worst race by definition, because every other race is going to have at least one good matchup
for sure.
And then undead is good against human, it's good against night elf. I'm not sure about against orc. I really don't know.
Depends on the Crypt Lord. It really depends on the coin flip of strategy. Like Blade Master, in my opinion, of course, Blade Master is favored against Death Knight, not favored against Crypt Lord. Farseer favored against Crypt Lord, not favored against Death Knight. So I think if you flip the coin and you get the right strategy, one race is favored, maybe 55-45. But it's tough to say overall because they both have one sort of StarCraft 2 coin flip build that works better. Not an automatic win, of course, but works better, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
it's hard to say. But human good against night elf. I'd say good against orc. I'm not sure about that either. I actually love playing orc against human, but I also love playing human against orc, so I'm not sure. But it feels like it's like there are certain matchups where you can talk about balance, but you can also talk about gameplay and like fun factor, or maybe even how easy or hard a matchup is.
Right.
So I think one of the best examples would be like Night Elf against Orc. Super easy to play. Easiest thing in the world. You just go keeper hunts. At the top level, it's favored. It's Orc favored. With Grunt Shaman expansion, all that style. But it's a lot harder to play. It's a lot harder to play against keeper hunts than it is to play keeper hunts. That's another thing you gotta, I think, keep in mind when you're talking about balance.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Clap Blizzard against Orc is super easy. Breakers, attack, move, and clap. And Orc has to micro. Like Orc, it's a bit of a contradiction, I suppose, because Orc, I think, takes by far the most micro of all the races. So I probably shouldn't be playing Orc. But the way I play Orc doesn't take a lot of micro. But the standard Orc, typically, I would say takes by far the most micro in the game, because like every unit, there's no auto cast. Every unit has this ability you have to use, like ensnare, devour, disenchant, purge, lightning shield. Like there's so much you have to micro as Orc. And then like human can attack move. Night Elf can attack move. Undead can just right click with Orb. So like Orc is kind of singled out, I think, as the hardest race and always has been. Which is kind of like you were talking about like a new player, if you were going to recommend a race. I see a lot of people say go Orc because they have these beefy units. It's easier to micro, but I was like, no.
Yeah, no.
Don't tell them to go Orc.
No.
That's going to scare them away.
Yes.
Just stick far away from, unless maybe Farseer Headhunters, right? Because then you have that.
Nowadays, for sure. Yeah. And then most people would say undead. Yeah, a lot of people do also have the opinion that, and I'm saying this as an Orc player too, but I do agree with you that I think Orc does have the sort of the hardest micro. But a lot of people say like undead might have the hardest micro, but I think that's just, there's some visceral feeling with undead players, and I know, if I had an undead player talking to me right now, I might not say this, but there's a visceral feeling that when you're microing your undead units, if you're not happy with these top players, if you're like a lower level player like myself, that you're doing it really well. Everything's got aura, you're coiling, and you're like, oh, that fiend was 1 health, now it's full health. Like, it feels like you're doing a lot, and it feels like you're microing like a god, and you watch all these 120 replays, and it feels like it takes the most micro, because I think the micro is the most rewarding for undead. But in reality, I don't know if it actually does. Close to Orc, but maybe not exactly Orc.
No, I would say undead takes probably, well, let's be fair here. I mean, I know what you mean. I had that experience when I first played like Death Knight with Aura and Ghouls, and I just surrounded things all over, like over and over. Like, wow, I'm so good.
Yeah.
But it was just the Aura. I couldn't do it with human. I didn't know the game after. It was just the Aura. So yeah, undead definitely. I think if you're an undead player, it's easy to feel like you're good at the game, but you're not actually. You know what I mean? It's
I 100% know what you mean. Absolutely, yeah.
But to be fair here, undead is just like orc, I would split them into like human and night elf
Hmm.
on one side and orc and undead on the other side.
Right.
Human and night elf is very, very easy. You can attack move both of those races most of the
Mm.
time. There's a lot of auto cast. There's a lot of like bear dryad. You can just attack move. You don't
Hmm.
have to micro. Yeah, I mean not at the highest level, but you know what I mean. Like if
Yes,
you're going to
absolutely.
introduce someone to the game,
Hmm.
it's very, very easy to attack move breaker caster
Yes.
or even rifle caster. You have everything on auto casting. You just right click stuff.
Hmm.
Whereas undead, you can never attack move.
Hmm.
Which is, so it's a slight step up. You have to right click stuff. You
Yes.
can't just attack move. But then orc is like the way up here because it's like you can't attack move or focus fire. Really, you have to be microing everything at once. You have to make sure. It's a very clunky army unless you're playing the way I do, because then it's very, very simple. But like if you look at Grubby or Lynn or something like a high level orc playing standard, it's I think by far the highest uh, skill cap as well, because
You can always be
you
doing
have
more damage if you're microing melee
exactly.
units in a way.
And it's the most frustrating thing in the world to play against a good orc because they do have all the tools and you don't.
Mm.
So a classic example is if you're going like demon, naga, mass dryads, let's say against orc.
Hmm.
You don't have a whole lot of say in how the game goes.
Right.
You have slow poison and cold arrows, I guess, but he has ensnare and speed scrolls and wind walk. Like he can do so much more. And if he's like Lin, he's probably gonna lose because he's just he's in control of the game. And that's I
Right.
think orc is typically in control if they want to be, if they're very, very good.
Yeah, I've had this thought before, and people might get mad at me for first my thoughts on undead, and now what I'm going to say about orc here. But just my opinion, chat. Don't worry.
Yeah.
There's this idea, a lot of people around my skill level and maybe lower and maybe even a little bit above my skill level, a lot of people say orc is so imbalanced. They've always said blade master's so imbalanced. Maybe it was in the past when the crits were very strong, but the way I always thought about it was when people call orc imbalanced is they would feel that it's super overpowered because when they would lose really hard because the orc player's like playing. That's when the orc player played really well, and when the orc player plays well, they just absolutely dominate you. They steal every creep. They're in your face. They're hitting 50 supply timings. They're always ready to fight. You can't kill a single unit. I'm talking more in the past, of course, so Spirit Link and all that. And when they're winning, they're really dominating you. But then when you're losing, you kind of can never get online, sort of thing. So when people would always say in the past, like, oh, Blade Master just crits my whole army and solos everything, well, it's because of all the things leading up to that point that they've built themselves up, and now they're in this dominant position that makes them feel unstoppable. That's always sort of my opinion for when people would call out orcs in the past for having like the most imbalanced hero in the game and all that. You sort of see what I mean? I mean, it's obviously I'm an orc player, it's orc bias, but can you kind of see that?
Yeah, I see what you mean, but the thing about orc, like I would say this, if you could ever play a perfect game of Warcraft, if you could play flawlessly, you would never lose a game with orc. And it's super frustrating to play against orc because if I get my unit ensnared, I can't do anything.
It's off the table.
No matter how good you are, if you're happy or if you're Joe Schmo, you're not going to be able to do anything about that ensnared unit. It's stuck.
Yes.
And orc has, on the opposite end, they can speed scroll and run away, and you can't do anything about it. They can sell their TP and buy this, I guess 75 gold now or 70 gold speed scroll, and it's like a get out of jail free card, and you can't do anything about it. So there are aspects to orc that I think are unfair and very frustrating because there's no counterplay.
Right.
They can make sure that you don't micro, and then they can make sure that they can micro as much as they want. With Spirit Link, with Windwalk, you mentioned the Blade Master. I think Blade Master is by far the most broken hero ever in the game. Critical Strike is really stupid. Windwalk is incredibly stupid.
RNG things are kind of stupid, I think, overall. Yeah.
I mean, if they're that impact, like I think evasion is a good example of something that's fine, like 30% evasion, whatever. But having crit, and I don't know if you've seen that video, the time where Lynn crits like 3 times.
That used to be on my stream, my donation alert back in the day. All the Korean casters freaking out. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. And that always happens like 1 in a million games, but just the fact that such a spell exists with such, and how many games haven't ended where like out of the blue a lich gets double critted and dies, and then the undead leaves because the orb's gone. So that's kind of silly. So I definitely think like we have to be careful with orc. They might not be like the strongest right now, but they're creeping in the shadows, and at any moment they'll pop up with their unstoppable tools and be the best race again.
Yeah, I've never thought as someone that's, I've always sort of played Orc with brief stints in other races for fun. I've never thought that they've been like underpowered, certainly. I've never thought they've been the best race from my point of view, but I've certainly never been like, oh my, like undead players were saying, like before Ted sort of won WCG in 2012, every undead player was like, oh, they're the worst race. We've never won a WCG, guys. And they always sort of, and they, some still kind of say that, but I've never been at that. And I think they had some justifications to the undead players out there. I think they had their reasons for saying that. They had good reasons, but yeah, I've never been there with Orc.
Yeah,
certainly.
well, they had their stats. To be fair, I mean, undead was
they did,
the worst performing
for sure
for a long time, and Orc was definitely dominant for a long time as well with the Blade Master.
Mm-hmm. All right, sorry, I'm just looking at chat for see if I think Bidu had a long question that he wrote out for you. Let me find this. All right. And, oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Okay, Kaiser asks, how much does Shape think lumber upgrades impacts the timing macro of fast expansion human versus elf? And maybe versus undead. So that new lumber upgrade, do you think that's a really big deal in the elf against human matchup when they're constantly fast expanding? Do you think that was like worth, like if that buff came in almost, is that like what's going to teeter the matchup to, oh, I'm going to play one base to, oh, I'm going to expand? Because it seems like a pretty big buff, but I'm not sure if it's like matchup changing.
I feel like it's one of those changes that I haven't noticed at all. So, I mean, it might be doing something in the background, you know what I mean? Like, but when the games that I have played Night Elf against Human, I haven't really thought about it at all and haven't really felt it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was made for that matchup. It was supposed to address the undead matchup.
Right, yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're going to fast expand against Night Elf, you're typically not going to get a Lumber Mill too early anyway. And I don't know. Yeah, because I couldn't say.
It seems big on the outside because it's kind of cheap, but I'm not sure how much it's actually impacted the matchups overall. I do think Human's still a little bit hurting because of that militia nerf. I think that I've always sort of thought this since they got nerfed that it should just be reverted, that militia change. Do you share that, or do you think I'm totally wrong on that?
It's hard to say because on some maps, like if the map is too small, I feel like it was always problematic where humans could just bring a bunch of militia to
right to the tavern,
like Amazonia. Yeah. Amazonia is a prime example where no matter where you fight on the map, they can always bring a bunch of militia, and that's kind of stupid. So I don't know about that. It's hard to say. I think it could be one of those things. I mean, we'll probably never get. You know, the developers when they release patches, they almost never revert something. Maybe they'll change something on the PTR, but they don't really. But I would love to see, among other things, just revert the militia nerf and see what happens.
Yes.
Give us 6 months of old militia, and if it breaks the game all of a sudden, then you can go back. But I think there's reason that you could put that back. Give them some more versatility, especially in their early game creeping.
Yeah, I've always thought it a little bit weird to either maybe buffing, there could be an argument made, like things like Moonwells, but like nerfing integral parts of races. Like if all of a sudden for Night Elf, Moonwells just got nerfed, right? Or all of a sudden for Orc, this is, Salves got, although Speed Scroll did get nerfed, maybe like Salves get nerfed. They only heal 300. But nerfing like big parts, the Aura nerf was, I think, maybe a little over the top. It's big parts of the races. If you nerf Coil Nova, make it cost 85 mana for a coil. I always have somewhat of an issue with that. I believe militia is an integral part of Human.
But they also nerfed at the same time Ancient War, and I think that was their thinking. I don't know. I'm not in their minds or anything, but I feel like they were thinking like, we'll make this slightly worse, and we'll make the Night Elf creeping slightly worse, because they were the two strongest creeping races, the ones that felt the most unfair.
Right. Okay.
I'll just use my barracks to creep this huge creep spot. That's kind of stupid. So I think they nerfed both of those at the same time, and felt that was the justification, but you could probably revert both of those in my opinion.
Cool. Okay, I found Bidu's question. He says, question, you probably weren't aware at the time, but did you find out after maybe when you took the Tidehunters map off Happy, his stream went from 400 to 1,600 viewers, and pretty much the community blew up with the Happy Unbeatable thing? Does something like this fire you up hearing it? He said, yeah, I didn't know, 400 to 1,600 viewers, apparently. I've never seen a Happy stream at 1,600 viewers. But BDO, does that fire you up?
If it fires me up now, knowing that it happened, or like in the moment?
Maybe in the moment,
Because,
knowing this guy isn't unbeatable, I could actually do this, maybe.
well, the thing about Happy, it's a how do I put this? He playing against Happy is such a unique experience that even though I'm winning the game, I don't get nervous at all because 9 times out of 10, I'm still going to lose. No matter how far ahead I feel, because, if I'm playing anyone else, I don't know if this resonates with you, but, if I'm playing Hawk, let's say, and I don't think I'm going to win. I usually don't win against him. He's a very tough opponent for me. But I'll get into a situation where I'm winning, and I'll start to shake. I'm like, oh my god, I'm winning this game.
Right? Yes.
And get really nervous because I don't want to throw it now. But until that point, I'm not nervous at all because I'm the huge underdog. I don't care. But then I start winning, and I get really nervous. Now against Happy, that stage never comes because no matter how far ahead I am, I always expect to still lose.
Right.
So even when he GG'd out of that game, I was still super into like, I'm going to lose this game. I'm building the towers. I'm like, I'm still expecting him to do his thing and win. And he just GG'd out. I'm like, what? He left? Why did he leave?
Right.
So in that sense, I'm not affected at all. After the game, I guess I'm really happy that I beat him because just taking a map is, I think, huge against Happy. When I finally beat him with Night Elf, I put it on YouTube right away. Like I don't usually do that with anyone, but with Happy, if I just beat him once with Night Elf, I put it on YouTube.
Yes.
So I've actually beat him in more with Orc now than with Night Elf, which is kind of sad.
Oh, have you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Because I beat him on ladder as well with Orc.
I think that is something that, well, I mean, if he struggles with it, every undead should struggle with it, I suppose. Like, maybe not 1-2-0, but every other or undead should. But I do think that is something that he's always sort of struggled with. I think it's a great choice to do that against Happy, because just seeing him in the past against Orc in general, and it comes to mind when Lynn beat him on Terranus Stand, when he just kept Zeppelin dropping his base and Raider laming him.
Yeah.
I think that's a great strategy to do against Happy, because if he struggles with it, I'm imagining he might. I don't think Happy doesn't have the solution to things. Like, he must still have the solution, and then still just is able, if you can't out-micro him, maybe you can outplay him with Raider Lame and moving around the map and stuff. Maybe you can outmaneuver him if you can't always win the fight. So that's the best way, I feel like, to beat him.
Especially if you consider, he has the best micro in the world. If you can play in a way where micro doesn't matter as much.
Yes.
Even if you're not me, even if you're a really good player, you should probably still try to win somehow that doesn't involve a straight up fight. Unless, again, it's this, we talked about being honorable, sticking to your race. I think it's kind of the same thing with playing the game. It's like you should be honorable and play straight up because you want to get better and you want to beat him straight up. But, fuck that. If you can pillage his base down to dust, then go for it.
Get the W. That's what I always say. When I played Human for a little bit, I would play straight up on ladder every game. I'd play pure standard, try to work. I would never go MK first, go Archmage every game. If I play you in a tournament, I'm just going to Tinker Tower rush you every time. I'm going to get the W in the tournament, and that's all that matters, is you get the win at the end of the day, and you go further in the tournament, and they're at home watching the stream. That's what's important at the end of the day, in my opinion, when it comes to tournaments. So there's no honor other than not stream cheating or something like that. But
but it's also like I mentioned before, the whole, like, when you're learning a new race, there's always this. You have this excuse of, I don't really know what I'm doing.
Yes. So
it's actually a lot of, I hate playing as Happy with Night Elf. I almost want to leave the game at start because, I'm not going to learn anything. I feel like I know what I'm supposed to do and I know what he's going to do and he's going to win because it's better than me. But all these games with Orc, it's fun every time because I'm like, I can watch the replay afterwards and learn a lot because I'm still learning the race. So, that helps a lot as well with, like, just mentally going into the game. Like, there's no pressure. I'm off racing. And even if I wasn't off racing, there's no pressure because he's so much better.
Yeah.
And I can learn. So let's have fun and try and learn from the game. And if I can win a map, that's really cool.
For sure. And I think it's been almost 3 weeks. People are still talking about it. So, it's really cool. It is a really cool thing to see. Every time Happy's like losing to people, honestly, people like to see it. It's nice. It's nice to know that he has cracks.
It speaks to his level. You know, the fact that,
Absolutely.
like you said before, if someone takes a map,
Yeah.
it's a huge deal. I mean, like, nobody has ever been that good.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has ever been that good. Even back in the old, remember Zotac,
Mm-hmm.
Zotac Cups? It was almost always Remind and
Yes.
who or Focus in the finals, and it was
Mm-hmm.
almost always Remind who won. But still, enough times someone else would win
Mm-hmm.
that it was still really fun to watch. Hawk would win sometimes. Some guy, maybe Remind doesn't even make it to the finals sometimes. But
Yeah.
with Happy, it's like it's gotten to the point where just taking a map is a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and nobody expects you to win the series anyway. It's just like, wow, you got the one map. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Like, oh, it wasn't Foggy didn't lose 0-3. He won 1-3 this week, or like I did a whole episode of this show on like the 2 times that Foggy beat Happy. Like I did a whole episode on it. It was like 3.5 hours long, and then he didn't beat him afterwards. But all right, we'll do like one or two more questions here because Remo Demo has a question. He says, "What underused hero would you like to see emboldened via a change most, and in what way?"
Emboldened.
Emboldened. Remo's got away with words, man. He makes the big
This is a
bucks.
wordsmith, yeah. Well, I think this might be a leading question here. I think Remo knows what I'm going to say. I would love to see the Priestess of the Moon
Mm-hmm.
be. Here's the thing. Here's the thing, Carson.
Mm-hmm.
I have this issue with Blizzard or with like the game devs
Right.
where they will make changes to things, to heroes specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll say it's because they're underused or they're too weak or whatever.
Right.
So if they buff the Pit Lord, or for example,
Mm-hmm.
Because he's underused,
Mm-hmm.
or if they buff the Alchemist because he's underused, they make Heal Spray really strong.
Yes.
Then my immediate question is, well, who decides? Why is it so important that the Alchemist gets used? But then you have heroes like the Priestess of the Moon that are just garbage.
Right.
Why isn't that a priority?
Mm-hmm.
We have, auras like Thorn's Aura, which is completely useless. Why does nobody think that's
Right.
worth it? Like, you know what I mean? It seems kind of arbitrary when they make these changes. So it's like, oh well, Keep of the Grove. We want to see Keep of the Grove more. Like, why?
Yeah,
why
they're
not
throwing a dart blindfolded almost at the
that's what it
underused
feels
heroes.
like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Priest of the Moon is my favorite hero, but I will agree with Remo that it's probably the most boring hero in the sense that she doesn't do anything.
Right.
She's got an aura, she's got a searing arrows, and a scout owl. So that could be redesigned from like the ground up. Probably it'd be really cool, or just to change her buffer a little bit, because like she has such low damage output, but yet she has this skill that adds damage. It's like a contradiction almost. And yeah, I might be rambling again here, but
No,
searing arrows. Searing arrows is so much worse than the other arrows that it's not even funny. And I think it has to be. It's like, in card games, I don't know if you know this at all, like Hearthstone or Magic.
Yep, for sure.
Where they'll release new cards, and to incentivize you to use those new cards, they'll usually be stronger than the old cards. It's called power creeping. And I think that's what must have happened back in the day, way back in the day when they released Frozen Throne. They have the searing arrow, and they want to add these new arrows to the expansion. So they add the cold arrows and they add the black arrows. And so they say, well, we got to make them spicier than the searing arrow. We have to make them a lot better.
Right.
So a searing arrow was left, behind in the dust, and that makes me sad. So I think you could definitely like make her attack quicker, reduce the mana on searing arrows, buff searing arrows. Like you can really make her like a damage output hero if you wanted to. But right now she has those spells, but she doesn't really serve that role at all. Right. So it's kind of weird. Well, so that's probably the. Yeah, go ahead.
It'd be cool to see her as like a viable first hero almost. That's always like the dream, is to see all these heroes as viable first heroes. We have that with Shadowhunter since the wards got buffed, and we've had that Torn Chieftain since he got a bunch of buffs sometimes. It's so cool to see.
My dream as Night Elf is to go Priestess first in every matchup.
Yeah.
And go Owl Scout, because Owl Scout is so broken.
Right, yeah.
It's just a shame that it's on such a bad hero, but if it was on any other hero, I guarantee you that spell would have been nerfed long ago. Like Owl Scout is crazy. So that would be probably my number one pick.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's almost like that scout farm point you made earlier, Night Elf, and it's like he's just on top of me with this invulnerable scout at all.
It's
He's got two
invulnerable,
of them.
yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Level 2 owl is map hack. Like there's no
Right.
two ways about it. You
Yeah.
can have like 4 or 5 owls out at once. They're invulnerable.
Yeah.
It's the only spell in the game that there's no way you can do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. I think I love Potom actually. People like
Yeah.
Remo specifically. I've had this conversation with him actually. Him saying that Potom's boring. I'm like, I kind of like Potom. I actually like seeing Searing Arrow and seeing Claws and like get level 3 Searing Arrow because I want to see how much damage the Potom can do. I think it's a cool hero. I actually definitely agree with you in that. All right, I had one more. Somebody. This is. I think I know what your answer is going to be. For this, but somebody asked, Blue Steel Hot Boy asks, shout out to you, nice Zoolander reference. Hitman versus Happy. Who wins offline on LAN? Do you think it's close or even for no, not at all.
No. I'm sorry.
Happy
so
3-0? Oh,
yeah.
That's all right.
Of course.
Yeah. Do you think there is or like Lin, or like if you were to compare Hitman to Fly against him, or Hitman maybe to Soen, Focus? I think Lin would be the ultimate. Like probably if it was like Mortal Kombat, we had to put someone up against him. We'd probably put Lin up against Happy on LAN. But do you think Hitman would be close?
He was our champion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You think it would be close as though it were a Fly or a Soen or a Focus?
Yeah, I mean, let's be serious here. I mean, Hitman is very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this. I don't know this. I don't really, but I feel like he's not as active these days as he used to be. I feel like he's worse now than he used to be.
Right.
Old school Hitman who had like 5 top 5 NetEase accounts at once.
Right.
Could probably beat Happy,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like he benefits a whole lot from playing as much as he did because he really got those timings down, those creep patterns and stuff.
Yes.
So I'm not sure now, but if he got like a couple of months to practice for it, then he could probably.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say he could beat him, but he could definitely take some maps.
Mm-hmm.
I think I agree with you. Lin is probably the best chance we would have, or Infi. Infi.
Yes, yeah. Infi honestly Infi with Orc of course would be the number one, but Infi with Human has been very impressive against Happy in the past. He's very good at the avoiding fights, the lame sort of side of things, Zeppelin dropping, Blizzard harass, which I don't feel like Humans do enough. But yeah, Infi definitely. I think there's an argument to be made there that Infi over Lin for defeating Happy, and hopefully we'll see it in the future. But
I think he actually beat. I want to say that he was playing against Happy not too long ago, and he beat him with Farseer Naga, like Infi.
Right.
Farseer Naga Wyverns. It was Echo Isles. It was 2 base against 2 base even. I have no idea how he won. It boggles my mind because you could only see Happy's perspective. Like, I really would love that replay. But if there's anyone who can, again, kind of take away the micro advantage, get into these situations where micro doesn't matter as much, and Infi's probably the best.
Yeah, probably the best of all time at that, honestly.
Yeah,
That seems like his whole game plan, although he's got great micro. Very simplistic micro, actually, if you watch his point of view. But he's definitely the number one player at that, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool, man. Well, it's been over 2 hours. Told you 90 minutes, so I appreciate this. This is really awesome. If you have any shout outs, and then I'll do our Patreon thing, and then we can wrap up. But if you have any shout outs, now's the time, man.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me.
No worries.
It's been a pleasure. I guess shout out to all the Swedish guys. We're gonna. I mean, I've always been. Well, I've always been like a bit of an outsider in that group.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I thought when I first got invited. But Scott really kind of took me in, and it's been a lot of fun ever since then. So big shout out to Scott, and
Awesome.
shout out to the Swedish guys. And thank you very much.
Very cool. I will link your YouTube. Of course, Starshaped has a YouTube. He does analysis. It's very good. Go check it out.
It's been a while. I'm going to start to try and upload more recently. I think it's been like a month or so since I uploaded, but I'll try and get back at it. So hit that subscribe button.
Yeah, go check out YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. I think it's all the same thing, actually. Yeah, Starshaped, STHLM. Go check them out. Yeah, very, very good YouTube analysis. The stream, like I said, I've been watching, I think, since like 2014, maybe a little later than that. But Yeah, and of course, shout out to our patrons, the 500-euro Golden Goat, Ganabi Quakes, very much appreciate it. The 50-euro Midas Tiers, Toxie, Constantine Bohm, Nem22, Save Orcas, Scription, shout out to the 25-euro Profiteer, Don Delare, J Gats, and N Padroot. Thank you guys very much, and thank you, Starshaped, very much. This is a great conversation, man. I really appreciate it. I don't think we've ever actually spoken over the microphone or the Discord. I think it's only ever been in lobbies, so it was really nice speaking to you, and maybe we'll do it again one day, man.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.
All right, next week is Orc Week. Well, maybe we'll do some Raider hit and run. We'll see you guys there. Goodbye.